Alrighty, looks like we might be live and alive. Hello, everybody out in the random world of YouTube and parts unknown. Is me, your friendly little English professor, Professor MD Keyboard, back with a little something different again. Like I said, I wanted to transition away from purely gameplay, though I do love playing games and always going to return to playing games. For you guys, but I did want to engage with a couple of things, primarily because a couple of people did ask me. I've had a couple of former students or whatever who occasionally just stop by or watch a video or whatever, kind of ask me about these people, um, and ask me kind of my thoughts and position on them. Again, I was asked to do a couple of reviews on certain videos because they're interested in certain people's will say in certain topics, and they're kind of curious and wondering, well, hold on a second, what's the truth of the matter here? What's going on here? What can we is this guy talking out his ass? Is he telling me the truth? What's going on here? So there is a bit of an ask. So I am here to provide a little bit of, I suppose, insight on my end as far as whether or not these guys are talking nonsense, or this guy specifically that they wanted me to look at because he's one of the newer intellectual dark web individuals, you might say. I'm not sure if you would actually call it the intellectual dark web anymore. Most of them kind of reject that idea, which understandable. It's kind of a cringe name. But kind of the new anti woke aspects of YouTube. One of the newer figures. He's not super big yet, Warren Smith, but again, Jordan Peterson. We're also going to take a quick look at a debate of his. I'm not sure if we'll do the whole debate. We have just a section of it, but there's a couple of things I would highlight that might help one understand what is pseudo-intellectualism and whether or not this is pseudo-intellectual. And I'm going to start off with a bit of a warning, you guys. Pseudo-intellectualism is a tricky little subject, and it's something we got to be careful of with our uh, assessment of, we shall say. We got to be careful. We aren't just immediately painting somebody with a unfair brush, shall we say. Very easy to do, and it's very easy to get false positives and whatnot. So let's first, we'll get this up for you guys on your end. All right. So let's start with this one. Now, it's 10 minutes long. We're going to try to get through it somewhat quickly, but we're going to kind of take some notes on this as we go through. We have our first video here. Move that over. So the woke genius. Let's get rid of these. We'll kind of do it note by note, if you would, so much. And let's tools, you, like that. Kind of like that one, though. It's pretty nasty. Still pretty nasty. That's just kind of going to be the issue I'm going to have no matter what, I think. No matter what I do, it's going to kind of look a little crappy in my eyes. All right. So, wish this would go. It does. All right. So, Konstantin Kisin exposes woke authors' insane new theory. So, right off the bat, a big thing is pseudo-intellectuals always poison the well. There's always a lot of hyperbole. There's a lot of extremism. There's a lot of you're a big dum-dum. Again, look out for words like... Hold on, I have to. Because we move things around, I have to adjust. So, be on the lookout for words like destroy or owned or fool, blah, or something, or not necessarily fool, but makes him look like a fool. Because destroy, is this destruction? What does that mean, destruction? What is the idea here? A big thing also with pseudo-intellectual is that they rarely ever, at least in my experience, build things. They don't offer or build or teach things. It's often very much, they focus purely on deconstruction, which is ironic because it's both what I do as a critical theorist, but also it's what all the postmodernists and whatever they do. But again, they use lots of, again, hyperbole, lots of terms, memes. They use these acts, these little things to shortcut past logic. So we go past logic with, and then go straight into the emotion. Well, let's just take a look. So exposes, and again, notice the all caps here, exposes the woke author's insane new theory. Again, is this exposing? There's also a degree of narrative, meaning that oftentimes there's a large and small narrative in the analysis. The small narrative is whatever their story they're telling about this thing, about these people, blah, blah, blah. And then there's the meta-narrative as far as there's a war going on, and this is just one step in the long process of exposing all these things. And showing this is a hiding thing, which doesn't make sense because this is a interview, so this person is fully willing to engage with these things, and then he exposed it. Well, why would we use the term expose when like he talked about it and he explained his maybe disagreements with it? So is that something we would call exposure? Did he expose something? The idea of exposing means that there was something hidden, but if she told him the thing and then he pointed out the illogical nature of it, it's not really an exposure. It's not really, oh, you were hiding this, bad, evil, ooh. It's not right. So let's play it a little bit and we'll listen for a second. We'll make sure we got sound on your guys' end. It should be all right.
I made lots of really interesting new arguments you'd never heard before.
I have heard lots of those arguments before.
You haven't.
This lady thinks she's a genius, and she has written a new book.
The adoption argument.
Okay. So right off the bat, the editing of this is probably my biggest thing. So right off the bat, because it is very deliberately artful. So let's say, what does she say first here?
I made lots of really interesting new arguments you'd never heard before.
I have heard lots of those arguments before.
You haven't.
This lady thinks...
I've made lots of new arguments you haven't heard of before. So that's her talking. Again, she wrote a book and she's bringing it up. And again, when you're on your book tour or whatever, you hype it up a little bit. And she is expressing some degree of hyperbole. But also, we should remember that we need to also ask, is there any context behind whatever interview we're having here? Is there a past or previous interactions that may be coloring this person. Now, a big thing is that I know that Konstantin Kisin and many others are also kind of on this, we are the sane liberals, and all these new woke people are the crazies. And they like to just ask questions. They like to investigate things, but there's always kind of a tint to their investigation. It always seems to go one way. These people are wrong and weird and crazy, and we should not agree with them or not listen to them because they're weird and crazy. I really thought the pen just went bad on me or what, but this is not great. I'm seeing here. Anyway. Something like that. All right. So that's something, again, I don't know. They may have had interactions before, but we can see right there the editing is we take a moment where she is coming off as arrogant, but also perhaps there is legitimacy. She is making arguments and reframing them in a way that has not been seen before. And Konstantin Chris, I believe that is, I believe he is Konstantin Chris. I can't remember if it's either one. The other interviewer says, I have seen them a lot. So let's go back. I know we got 5 seconds in. We've barely covered anything, but.
I made lots of really interesting new arguments you'd never heard before.
I have heard lots of those arguments.
I have heard lots of those arguments before. Now, the question is again, how much control and how much knowledge do you have for this statement? How much context do you have as a viewer? So think about this. What happened before? What was happening before or after? Again, you are brought up in the middle of this with very little context for what she was saying, what arguments she might have made mention of, and whether or not this interviewer is correct in saying he has seen these before or not. We're not quite sure based on this conversation dynamic. We can't really postulate very effectively. Now, the other thing we might also think about is, I don't know if he's even read the book yet. So if she's written a book and she's just written it and posted out there, did he read it yet? Did he have a chance to read this yet? Again, a framing thing might be nice. It might be saying like, okay, this is so-and-so and Konstantin Chris are interviewing this new author. They've read her book and they're questioning her about this book. I know it sounds lame and silly and maybe not very good for this, but context and the frame, in this case, there is a framing happening, not necessarily like you're framing somebody for a crime, though you could think of it like that, is that there's a framing that is very deliberate. I want your first impression of her to be arrogant. However, if he's never read the book, let's just pretend part of this conversation is that he's already said, I haven't read your book yet. And she's like, well, you really should, because, I've wrote a lot of new ideas, a lot of things here. And then he says, I've seen those before. I've seen many of those before. And then she kind of has that little bit of a really, dude, looks arrogant. But if we understand, oh, that's the framing of that question, this interaction, we would go, yeah, that would be kind of a natural, like, if you haven't read my book, how do you know you've already encountered these ideas before? It's, again, the framing here is not great.
You haven't.
This lady thinks she's a genius, and she has written a new book.
Again, thinks she's a genius. Jesus. Sorry, the pen is weird sometimes, and my looking across at chat or anything else doesn't help with my both spelling and writing. So. Also, I would like to add, again, I'm not much of a feminist here, so I tend to be less caring about certain gendered microaggressions and kind of diminutives, but this lady, Now, again, lady oftentimes is supposed to be a noble kind of thing, so a nobility or of high society versus a tramp or something like that. This lady's, but don't mistake this for a compliment. This lady thinks she's a genius. This lady. Why are we pointing out her gender? Is it necessary? You could say this professor, this academic, this author. Why was it necessary to do this? And two, you don't say her name. You call her lady. Again, this is the difference if I were to look at this and look at Warren Smith and I say, this dude. See, dude is an informal, which automatically implies if I am being very informal about a person or introducing them in an informal way, either I am doing it from a familiarity standpoint, which I'm not familiar with this person. I don't know them. They're not my friend. The other way is that if I'm doing this in an informal way, I could be, and quite frankly, I believe this is to be the case, is I am automatically trying to convince you that this person is not important or this person is not significant. This lady, random crazy lady off the street. And again, we don't use lady anymore in a positive, necessary positive. It's not always negative, but we don't use it in a positive sense like we might have back in the 1800s or 1700s, the difference between a peasant woman and a lady, the class differentiation. We don't really do that much anymore. So now we just have the gendered and the generality, and it's actually become more informal to a certain degree. So, this lady thinks she's a genius. Did she say she was a genius? More importantly, you might say, oh, well, she was being arrogant right there. But again, we don't know the context. And the question itself, again, for an interviewer, like if she's saying, I'm presenting new ideas, it's kind of rude for an interviewer to say, no, I've seen all that shit before. Again, I'm being hyperbolic right there. But again, the reaction of, I've seen all these ideas before. Again, people don't know how to talk without being an asshole anymore. I feel like in the vast majority of YouTube spaces, nobody ever is not an asshole. Because again, there's ways of broaching that topic in a more congenial and positive, I'm learning from you, you're learning from me kind of mindset, or a positive inquiry into whether or not they are novel ideas or ideas we've seen before. But right off the bat, this kind of put down, this is hallmark of pseudo-intellectual kind of critique and pseudo-intellectual engagement. It's not always 100%. Again, there's oftentimes very valid reasons to be angry or frustrated with somebody, so I don't want to take this too far. But again, if you want to present yourself in the opposition to madness, and especially you are saying these other people are pseudo-intellectuals and you are not, you are the true one. Again, YouTube and online engagement rewards hostility, anger, and lack of subtlety. But it would be probably better, instead of right off the bat jumping into on this, to have some kind of a neutral stance. Well, let's try it. Let's go forward a little bit.
Book.
The adoption argument is I'm the first one making it.
So she comes onto the Trigonometry podcast to promote it.
The adoption
I've heard lots of those arguments
you
before.
haven't.
This lady thinks she's a genius, and she has written a new book.
The adoption argument is I'm the first one making it.
So she comes onto the Trigonometry podcast to promote it.
This is a book of ideas.
So the next thing, again, editing, is there seems to be, and I noticed this a little bit, I didn't play all of this, but I noticed quite quickly, is fast edits are the enemy. Fast edits and fast content are the enemy of insight and actual truth. I know you guys, you young people out there in YouTube, Instagram spaces, you love your short form content kind of engagement, but that shit's awful for you. It is not particularly good. It might give you the answer, theoretically, in a way, the answer, but you never understand the process, and you never, because you don't develop the process because you were forced to go through it by watching and reading larger chunks of data. Because you don't do this, you end up with an answer. You end up with understanding 2 plus 2 equals 4, and you also understand 2 multiplied by 2 is 4, but you don't understand really the difference between those two things right there. And this can lead to a problem to where you can end up at something like this. That's a terrible 5. I don't like that 5. That 5. Bad 5. You can end up at something like that. Why? Because you might have only ever developed an understanding for this process, this mechanism here, and never developed this one. But short form content gives you a short, quick answer. Here's a neat little trick to solve this real quickly. Here's a fun little trick you can do. Yeah, fun little tricks are great. The problem is that they are not a substitute for actually understanding any content here. So again, fast edits. This lady thinks she's a genius. She wrote a book. Cut away. She's being interviewed. Cut away. It's like, yeah, I fucking get that. I see that. For me, at least, I'm an old fuddy. I see that. Yeah. I see she's giving an interview, and she wrote a book. And we're cutting back and forth. She wrote a book, and then she says, I wrote this book.
And I know a lot of people will go to this chapter first. It's called The Conversation About Gender Nonconformity.
What she claims is a genius, brilliant, never heard before new theory.
Did she say it was genius, brilliant, never heard before theory? She said it was, at best, the only evidence you have provided, Mr. Warren Smith, is that she said it was new. Or she's got some new novel ideas. Now, you could maybe make the argument that her making the claim of new, when this is a topic that has been analyzed a lot, could be a sign of arrogance. But again, this seems extremely uncharitable to somebody. Again, they're writing a book and they're trying to promote it. When you're doing that, you do kind of want to, you don't want to say, well, yeah, it's just a book with some random stuff in there. You don't have to get it. There is a degree that they do want to present this like, hey, there is value in you reading my book because I think I present some new novel ways of approaching these problems. And again, he keeps saying she thinks she's a genius. Why? Because she's not demure with this. Why? Because she has a degree of pride in what she's done. Because if she's questioned on these things, she responds not just like this mewling, oh, I guess you might be right. I don't know. She doesn't fold. She has maybe a spine. I don't know. I haven't seen enough for this attitude to warrant this. Other than she's a woman, she has funny glasses, which again, the makeup, the look of her, she looks like an academic, but she looks like the stereotype feminist academic, the older feminist academic. And she's a woman who maybe has a spine. So far, it's hard to tell. She at least didn't fold immediately and apologize for daring to say she has new shit. I don't know where you got this, Warren. From somebody who is an academic to another academic. I don't know why you're going off the handle so quickly. Is this somebody you've interviewed before? Is this part of a series? Is this somebody you've seen before and you've done their videos before and you have a reason, a personal or in many ways a professional, because you've done videos on this person before, a professional history context that might indicate why you're acting so uncharitably douchey? This is weird. This is not good.
She claims is a genius, brilliant, never heard before new theory.
If 30% of bus drivers dress like clowns for a year, you would stop noticing.
I don't think I would, no.
It evolves into a debate.
So again, it seems like once again this is again another debate on transgenderism, which Which is another indication oftentimes of right-wing grift and pseudo-intellectual on the right-wing area, because they go with what's popular to be talked about at this time rather than what is maybe important or significant or their own interests. So again, we're still arguing and talking about this because this is literally the only thing, the obsession. I know they talked about, and I've mentioned this, that the progressive left side are somewhat obsessed about transgenderism. Like, I'm sorry, I almost feel like I need to retract all that, because the amount of time, space, energy, and sheer vitriol and just unimaginable amount of resources that more right-wing or centrist, God, I don't think they are centrist, but whatever, maybe they are, that all of these new intellectual dark web, these heterodox, these alternative professors, learned people, whatever, the amount of time they spend obsessing with transgenderism is shocking. But okay, so and again, the new novel idea. So he sets up this idea here. New novel idea. So what is her new novel idea? And it's the chapter on transgenderism. So he sets up this new idea. The new idea. What is it? The way it's framed is suggests that, again, we have a simplification of this to a certain degree, but she is talking, it presents itself in an anecdote. He cuts in her anecdote of the, if 30% bus drivers dress as clowns, so we'll avoid that. We'll just say bus drivers dress like clowns for a year. He says, so action plus time. If I can salvage my eye there, I can't. Equals this is ultimately what she's going for, is the idea of that normalcy is a process of a act, and what shall we do? So an action, and so we have two things. We have actually three things here. Let's put them in order. So we have mass plus action plus time equals normalcy. That was her argument right there. And Konstantin Kisin seems to disagree or wants to push against this, and probably Warren Smith as well.
Brilliant, never heard before, new theory.
So here's the new theory. And again, these fast edits, again, we don't see her talk in longer form about this new theory. We just get an anecdote. So she could have had a couple of sentences before that explains the logic and ideas of this. Then she comes with not quite an anecdote, but an analogy or some kind of framing metaphor for them. And then we have Konstantin Kisin's response.
If 30% of bus drivers dress like clowns for a year, you would stop noticing.
So, if 30%, let's just take that. Is this a rational argument, or is this something that we could see some degree of logic behind, or at least the framework here? Now, again, notice again, she's coming up with this on the fly, it looks like. It's not a fully developed thing. You get that idea because she's kind of like looking up in the sky, like she's imagining kind of trying to imagine a scenario, creating on the fly. So I'm going to give her a little bit of leeway on this, because I do think that it would be, you probably would still notice this. As Kisin notes, he would still notice that the bus drivers are dressing like clowns. But here's again, this is another thing that pseudo-intellectuals often do. is they will either miss the forest for the trees, basically missing the broader point for some hyper-specific inaccuracy or otherwise silliness that came about not from a true flaw of the idea, the concept, but came about from the delivery of this concept. It's very much focused on your performance rather than the overall meaning of this, which again is somewhat ironic, seeing how they're constantly trying to make this claim that they're the logical ones and everything else is illogical, blah, 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 blah. They're all stupid, woke people. But their own kind of analysis is frequently very, 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 very flawed because it actively is like anti-human. Like it doesn't, there's such bad faith engagement that it's quite annoying here. Again, missing forest for the trees here, missing the point. So let's just take a look at the specific example, because that seems to be what Kisin focuses on. He says, I would still notice, and this is obviously cut to show, wow, she thought she was making a really brilliant point, and Konstantin Kisin completely shuts it down with just normal logic. Logic beat out this argument. But did it? On the specific case, again, just the trees, noticing just in this specific thing, is this a great kind of analogy? Is this a great kind of metaphor? It's not great, primarily because I think she keeps the scale too small, but she does want, she takes too extreme of a angle with this. But let's look at the broader idea. Mass amounts of people, so a large percentage of people take an action, a similar action, and do a similar action for a extended period of time. And they all are doing this. Does that lead to a normalization of that action, of the behavior? If enough people do this action X, enough people do action X for a certain amount of time, do X for a certain amount of time, will this lead to normalization? Is this completely and utterly bonkers? No. I would say this might be maybe a point against her, if you wanted to see this as a point against her, because this is not a particularly new or novel idea. This is just basic concepts of social construction and socialization and normalization of culture and or social tendencies. Again, way back in the day, the idea of women wearing pants would have been scandalous and would have immediately drawn attention. Even just normal jeans or something that's like that, like Wrangler jeans, would have drawn an incredible amount of attention back in the 1800s. Like it would, the equivalent today would be like a woman walking down wearing a yellow dress that's that extends like 12 feet above her, and she's wearing like this incredible, crazy, weird shit. Like wearing I don't know, some kind of alien costume. It'd be let's do that. Like literally from the movie Aliens with Sigourney Weaver, directed by Ridley Scott, somebody walking down the street in an alien suit. That's going to cause notice. But if you had 30-40% of the population in America, or specifically even just a population of bus drivers wearing an alien suit for a long time, 10, 15 years, people might still notice, like the older generation, but the newer generations, or even kind of the middle generations, after a while, people are going to just go, yeah, that's just kind of what they wear. It's a little weird. Like hospital scrubs. We didn't always wear hospital scrubs. We wore different things, lab coats. We wore all different things. And yet now, if you see a nurse or something like that in hospital scrubs, in the kind of nursing uniform, you don't go, wow, that's kind of strange. You go, well, I mean, that's what a nurse wears. So this idea is not at all strange. again, the bad faith nature of, again, pseudo-intellectualism is oftentimes pseudo-intellectualism, ultimately, because it is a fake intellectualism, there's a degree of defensiveness and, in many ways, fear and cowardness. Again, this is not exclusive to pseudo-intellectuals, but they often display very strong tendencies to be highly resistant to play. Now, what do I mean by that? Is that a lot of intellectual pursuit, a lot of thinking, a lot of critical analysis, a lot of engaging with ideas often requires a degree of play. You have to be willing to play by the rules. You have to be willing to go with an idea for a while. You have to be willing to play act like you are a believer of this, so you understand what the believer might think or feel, or so that you can then ask questions based on what you think. Like, if I was a believer in this, this is the first or second question I might ask if I'm being convinced by this, or let's investigate this. There's a degree of play. And there's also a degree of play in the opposite end, where you are counter to this, where you are the antagonist. You are playing both protagonist and then antagonist, and then back to protagonist, antagonist, for the various ideas. This is how you test ideas. This is how you critique them. This is how you engage with this kind of medium. So this lack of play, this clear kind of bad faith lack of play on the part of, I believe that is Konstantin Kisin, is that particular person, is rather than playing with idea. And again, he in fact shuts down the discussion by doing this. And again, Warren Smith is encouraging this and otherwise showing this to be the correct way to do this because of the editing choices here. Instead, what my question would be is like this. Okay, so, I mean, that might be like, so the idea is basically if enough people take a particular action, no matter how strange it is, and they do so over a long enough period of time, there's a degree of normalization. But my question would be is like the time aspect, like there's a rapidness to this, a rapid onset aspect to this kind of change that, what do you think about this? And I'll try to develop some greater thing there. There is nothing there. It's just immediately shut down. The whole thought process, the whole line of ideas, the whole forest is cut down because because one or two of the trees didn't immediately make sense. This is my issue.
I don't think I would, no.
It evolves into a debate, but she kind of takes this to a whole new level.
It evolves into a debate. So here's again, it involves, so she's doing here and they're interviewing her, but why are they interviewing her? Are they interviewing her because they agree and they are interested in this book? Or are they interviewing her because they saw this as an opportunity to attack, to criticize? Oh, this is the opposition releasing a new book. I want to investigate this. And again, I've seen some of Konstantin Kisin and Trigonometry, their podcast, and they always try to present themselves as somewhat centrist, left-leaning liberals, the logical people trying to figure out the crazy weirdness of the world, and we're just good on intellectuals who have been lost by the left, has left us behind and gone into crazy town. They do some against right-leaning stuff, but honestly not a lot. They're primarily focused, it seems, on the left-leaning sphere. So again, I understand some context better than what is being presented by Warren Smith. And again, the shortcuts. There's not a lot of meat for me to eat, and then there's not a lot of actual analysis so far. Again, we're only 33 seconds in, but there's not a lot of analysis from him. So let's try to play this for longer.
Level.
I would continue to notice that they're dressed like
For how
clowns
long?
for all eternity, because I know what a bus driver is supposed to look like.
Ah, interesting.
Rather than...
See, notice we cut away from that. Because we wanted the humor of Konstantin Chris, the down-home, good old wisdom responding to this crazy insanity that's coming from them odd liberals. I know I'm playing up the whole Southern conservative, rural wisdom over this, which is not what they necessarily represent. But that is still the same kind of like, oh, look at these silly academic city folk with their stupidity. They don't understand that this, of course, is strange. But again, one, he says, we cut away before she can actually respond to his mockery, because he is kind of mocking her to a certain degree. He's just incredulous. He's so incredulous. I would notice this for all time because I know, haha. And again, there's a bit of genealogy, and she responds with some degree. She doesn't respond angrily or with extreme, offense. She, in fact, seems to recognize he actually led himself into a stupid trap, because he does lead himself into a dumb trap by saying, I know what a bus driver should look like. Is Warren Smith going to analyze that incredibly interesting statement? What a bus driver should look like. That is a very, very confident statement with a lot of things that you shouldn't be confident on. One, should is ought. Either there could be a morality, or otherwise you are making an assumption. If this isn't a moral statement, which it could be a moral statement, but it's probably not a moral statement, it's a predictive statement on objective reality. I have seen objective reality before, and thus I am making a prediction that this should, as an ought to, if all things being equal, if the world has not changed radically, this result should be X, based upon previous things. And you are making an assumption. And you know what happens when you assume something? You make an ass out of you and me. That's an old stupid joke that I kind of messed up, but that's all right. So, I know what a bus driver should look like. Really. Because I've seen bus drivers throughout the centuries as I've studied history or whatever, and they don't all look alike, and their uniforms change quite frequently. Sometimes their uniforms look like almost uniforms for mailmen. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they look more normal, quote-unquote normal. But again, it used to be normal to see a bus driver, in fact, it was part of their uniform, to have a hat. Kind of like the mailman. They would have a hat. They don't have a hat anymore. Why don't they have a hat anymore? In fact, if you were to look at a bus driver now, outside of the logo on it, they might look like an office worker. They might look like somebody who works in an office. It's not super formal, but not super informal. It's button-up shirt, usually long sleeve. They got pants on, standard kind of slack pants or something like that, not jeans. And they have some kind of shoes, though. I've seen tennis shoes. I've seen, many different types of shoes on there. I don't see loafers. I don't see highly polished shoes. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. So my question is that, and you might be saying, oh, well, you're being too specific. Well, see, that's the point. She might have been a bit overreach and hyperbolic with the idea of the clown suit, but guess what? Much like evolution, you don't see a massive change instantaneously. You see tiny changes over many, 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 many years. And just like that, you can also see tiny changes. You may end up at a point where a bus driver in the year 6262 is wearing a suit and certain kind of designs or whatever that it may not look 100% like a clown with the big fuzzy hair and the makeup, but their suit they may have really large red shoes. They may have white gloves that have like red tipped fingers on them, or little accents of red that look like classic clown. It might be if I were to travel my, 21st century ass, and I travel to the year 6262 and I see a bus driver, I might go, that guy kind of looks like a clown. Like, he doesn't look 100% like a clown, But he kind of reminds me of a clown. His coloration, his weird, funny suit, and the big buttons. He's got 3 big buttons on the front of him. You know, he's wearing like a hazmat suit because the environment is shot to shit because Republicans kept getting voted into office, and we're all dying of post-apocalyptic style climate change. Joking. Well, probably not. That might actually happen. But let's really, it is not impossible to think that you will look at somebody and go, that person looks like a clown in 4,000 years. Or even 50 years. Or 20. Look at any fashion industry. So we are dealing with social and cultural change in regards to the idea of how we identify things based on their dress, based upon their visual identification, based on behavior, all of these things change and can change rapidly. Again, what might have been high fashion back in the 70s might make you look like a crazy, clownish figure today. Or it could be opposite. We often see resurgence. So this idea that we know what a bus driver should look like, there are so many assumptions within there. There are so many predictive assumptions based upon a category and based upon actions that make up this category, both the mass and the actions that they take and the visual representation that often shows itself, or in this case, a visual representation, that yes, she was being hyperbole, but to make the point. And perhaps she made it too strong. Perhaps she shouldn't have said something like that. Perhaps she should have made, honestly, the timeline longer. Is that like, if 30% of the bus drivers in the world dressed like clowns over the next 30 years, by the end of that 30 years, nobody, or certainly progressively throughout the years until we get to the year 30, to where nobody's really going to notice or care. Now, again, nobody. Does she mean that no one will ever possibly notice this at all? Again, I think that would be a unfair and bad faith interpretation of her actual point. Her actual point is that over time, a good chunk of people, and think about this, if you're a child born and every single bus driver is dressed like a clown, so you get on the bus day in, day out for school, traveling about the city because you're on a bus line, so you're traveling through school buses and you're also traveling through city buses, and all the bus drivers, or at least 30% of them, a good chunk of them, are dressed like fucking clowns. It might not be normalized for Konstantin Kisin and Warren Smith because they have 20, 30 plus years of consciousness, 40 years of consciousness and engagement with the world that has set certain terms in them and giving them a certain parameter, a certain collection of possibilities that is within the normal spectrum. And then there's ones outside that are outside the normal spectrum, the abnormal. They might not immediately go, oh, yeah, I don't recognize, they don't notice it anymore. They might still very much notice it. But again, this is just kind of a bad faith engagement with this. And I'm not even sure I agree 100% with the researcher. I haven't seen enough to disagree with her or agree with her 100%. This is an idea, again, about socialization and social constructivism, which again is not without merit. There are some kind of more extreme kind of presentations and kind of extreme points behind social constructivism that I do not agree with from what I've engaged with. So she seems to be more of a social constructivist in this argument. So I can go with it to a certain degree, but there might be something too far. But this is just bad faith, kind of weird dunking, and the editing is trying to set this up.
Considering, well, maybe my claim is not accurate. Her response to this is, well, your brain doesn't work like...
My claim is not... Again, I'm doing much the same that he is doing to a certain degree, but I am fully willing to try to hedge myself a little bit is one of the things that I find very annoying with pseudo-intellectualisms is oftentimes they engage in this kind of philosophical this drive, and again, it's unfair, this philosophical drive to the absurd, nonsensical, like this, I'm just kind of writing out my thoughts here, this black hole of meaning, to where if we break things down, it's like a semantic thing, to where you are breaking things down to such a fine, minute thing. Well, what does this mean? What could this possibly mean? Well, let's break this even further and further. And it's like, that's fun, but there's a degree to where they want to make it so vague, so abstract, so conceptuals of concepts of concepts of abstracts of concepts of abstracts of concepts. They want to break it down to not just the atom, but the subatomic particles. They want to break it down to even further and further and further, to where no meaning can ever exist. There can be no short form, long form meaning creation. It's all just craziness. But they only do this for an attack. They don't do it to their own position, to where they try to, because they don't deconstruct their actual own position to such an aggressive manner. They only ever do this whenever somebody else is bringing up kind of stuff. So again, this is a small little moment, but again, he's kind of, if we watch it again.
My claim is not accurate.
Because I know what a bus driver is supposed to look like.
Ah, interesting.
Rather than considering, well, maybe my claim is not accurate.
Well, maybe my claim is not accurate. Was this supposed to be a fucking accuracy? Was this a predictive model that she put out? 100% predictive, in the sense that she is saying this, or was this a hypothetical prediction that wasn't meant to be taken 100% literal, of clowns and 1 year and only 30%, but more taken as the idea of a large percentage taking a action which is normally, which quote unquote normally, normal here, seen as abnormal, done over a long period of time. A good chunk of people, or a normative amount of people who are not engaging in that action, will no longer see that action as strange or abnormal. But no, he accuses, oh no, you, instead of understanding, because Konstantin Kisin decided he didn't want to play a game, which this is an interview, a discussion, you're discussing ideas, you have to be willing to play the game. And if they don't play the game with you, if the opposite side doesn't play the game, she doesn't play the game when you present ideas or thoughts that are counter to her, that's a bad interview, and she's not playing correctly, and that's not fair, and that's not nice. And then maybe you can do that. But I haven't seen that. All I saw was her present a simple play scenario. In many ways, like, think of it like this: improv. She presented a scenario in improv. I am a so-and-so doing XYZ in this area right here. And Konstantin Kisin is the partner in this improv. And his response is, no, you're not. Like, she says, I am a barbarian queen from the lands of Hyperbia, or Hyboria. There we go. That's Conan's place, right? Hyboria? Yeah. I am a barbarian warrior queen from Hyboria. And Konstantin Kisin goes, well, no, you're not. You're a middle-aged academic with blue glasses. What do you mean? And then everyone else and Warren Smith are going to go, wow, he's just so grounded in reality. It's like, this, what the fuck are you doing? Like, I don't know what you're doing. What do you mean? In fact, his lack of play makes him even more ridiculous and strange. And then this right here, again, he had a minor disagreement, and Warren Smith is accusing her of dishonesty and arrogance and whatever, because she didn't, immediately collapse? I don't know if she did.
Her response to this is, well, your brain doesn't work like the average brain then.
Yeah.
So your brain works different from other human beings then in that case.
Well,
because
if we accept your premise of how people's brains work, whatever, let's carry on.
Now, again, notice again, this framing is really, really dishonest. I know we've spent like 20 minutes talking about this and we're only a minute in. That's me being my thing right here.
Accurate. Her response to this is, well, your brain doesn't work like the
Now, again, why are you laughing? Again, this is, your brain doesn't work like, what does he say here?
the average brain then.
Like the average
so
brain.
your brain works different from other human beings then.
Again, Warren Smith showing a degree of, again, pseudo-intellectual investigation here and critique. He laughs a little bit. He seems like he's like laughing at the ridiculousness and kind of flustered, like, instead of analyzing how she could be wrong, she instead just kind of goes and says, well, your brain is strange and abnormal. Again, I'm being a little hyperbolic to emphasize to you the degree of what he's doing here. And her response is again, she doesn't respond aggressively. She just kind of goes, if we were to assume that these are two things are connected, she goes, let's see.
Work like the average brain then.
Yeah.
So your brain works different from other human beings then in that
She might go, well, then your brain works different than other human beings.
case.
Well,
because
if we accept your premise of how people's brains work, whatever.
If you accept your premise, and again, then he wants to move on. That's a great little frame shot right there. Stoner Konstantin Kisin. No, but again, what's the framing is not at all that controversial to think that people's brains work based upon repetition, time, and experience to a certain degree. Yes, there might be biological factors and biological recognition of some things, perhaps, but honestly, it is not crazy or strange. It's not a abnormal premise to suggest this. But again, there is no play. There is this weird, almost, and I don't want to use this word in a derogative sense, but there's almost this weird autistic, extremely unaware of any of the social and linguistic clues that are happening, and instead taking things so verbatim or so kind of purely in a weirdly abstract, you've come with a frame, you've come with an idea of what you think they're going to say, and no matter what they say, your brain is automatically filtering and putting it into a box. But again, like I don't see the evidence with these quick edits and with this to give weight behind Warren Smith's analysis here.
Let's carry on with you, please. Carry on.
Here's an example. In the 1960s, Mary Tyler Moore had to fight really hard to be allowed to wear trousers on screen.
She's conflating style, which does evolve with objective truth, and biological reality.
What the fuck? Hold on, let me back up here. Sorry, I ate a Skittles, and he said something really weird and stupid. Sorry, Warren Smith, I don't mean to completely pick on you, but you are kind of acting like a pseudo-intellectual dumbass here. That was very dumb. Let's go back.
We accept your premise of how people's brains work. Whatever, let's carry on with you, please. Carry on.
Here's an example. In the 1960s, Mary Tyler Moore had to fight really hard to be allowed to wear trousers on screen.
She's conflating
So again, she's conflating
style, which does evolve with objective truth, and biological reality.
Style, which does evolve with objective truth and biological reality. How does style evolve with objective truth? Does he mean to say that style evolving is an objective truth? Maybe that's it. So, okay, we'll do that. I'm just not quite sure the objective truth of I'm not. It sounded very silly to me, but let's just say he means to say that there is an objective material, and again, I don't like this objective subjective framing here. Because again, there's this prejudice as that objective reality is more real than subjective reality, which we could maybe say from a materialistic standpoint, or perhaps, but again, this idea, most philosophers would find this somewhat tricky, and they would not like this kind of this preference, or positive preference towards objective reality idea, because again, this seems to ignore again the importance of kind of subjectivity of consciousness and experience and all those things, which we all have, and we all have to do it. So it's kind of like, oh well, this isn't real. Like, yes, I know it's not a material reality. It doesn't fucking matter if enough people, enough subjectivity is believing in this thing, even if we, again, maybe we want to get rid of them. We need to tackle and deal with that. But okay, so he's upset because, again, I don't know if he's actually read the chapter, but remember this argument is all about transgenderism, and she's trying to make the argument, some degree of argument of like social conditioning. It's hard to tell because he hasn't given us enough room, or Warren Smith did not give us enough room, he didn't give us the position that she had from a neutral standpoint, just saying, here's what her chapter argues. Here's the major points and ideas of whatever. Here's the interview between Konstantin and Chris, where she brings up some of these ideas. And then he can analyze both the interview, but also analyze the chapter. He doesn't do that. Instead, what he just takes her statement, again, a quick little interview statement, at 100% face value. This is the entirety of her argument. It has no other nuance. There's no other explanations of this. There's no elaboration, just this. And boy, it seems silly because she's conflating style, the objective reality of that style. Again, what the fuck is this, like the idea of that style? That style evolves as objective reality. But what is style? Well, style is the way it's a cultural hallmarker of how one expresses either femininity or masculinity or authority or respectability, counterculture, all of these things. Style is very much culturally and socially evolved and informed. So one style of dress might be seen as traditional and very conservative in one society culture, whereas it might be abnormal, strange, and almost counterculture and almost punk or radical in another. Okay. But like, and she's conflating, okay, biology. Again, did she say sex has changed? She talked about transgenderism, not transsexualism. She's not saying that the sex has changed, unless I saw something different, unless she's conflating sex, biological sex, and gender expression, which again, I know a lot of people, we use these things interchangeably to a certain degree because we assume for the general normativity, what you see is what you get. Kind of like a computer thing is WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. So if you see things that, according to other experiences, have been classified as feminine things, and you see a feminine presentation, you assume biological objective reality. And this is a nice, easy shorthand. But I'm sorry, as an English professor, as an English studier, and not big on linguistics. Again, that's a slightly different field than mine, and my different specialization. But it's like, yeah, congratulations. Human language is going to be a bit messy on this one, along with everything else. Sorry. And I don't think I didn't see that statement. She was conflating style and biological reality. What she seemed to be more saying is that, talking more about, she hadn't even brought up transgenderism necessarily, except in the beginning of the whole thing, where she's saying is more on the normalization of appearance and the how things can be normalized. That seems to be the topic that is directly being talked about right now, is how things are normalized based upon visual indicators, and how even the most abnormal of things we might imagine can become normalized if enough people do it for a long enough period of time. So she's then elaborating on that particular small point, which is funny for a philosophical individual. He seems to be a philosophy kind of professor, if I remember correctly, or a student, or whatever. I can't remember, a graduate student, graduate individual. For somebody who loves to draw things into this black hole of nonsensical, hyper focused on the most vague specificities. Jesus, can't speak today. To the point where we just lose any kind of functional meaning. He didn't see, like, okay, well, she's dealing with one type, one small part of her argument. So her argument may be made up of several different things: X, Y, and Z. Terrible Z. Like that Z. Right now, she's just dealing with one concept, the concept of mass action time, and the normalization, how things are normalized, how visual things and how we identify markers, such as occupation or perhaps even gender, based upon this little matrix here. That's just maybe one part. There might be more elaboration, but she's just dealing with this one idea. Not even relating it to transgenderism, just normalization. She has not said sex is determined by what people observe and see on a day-to-day basis. I didn't hear her say that. Where did she say that, Warren Smith? I would like to know where she said that and why you are making this accusation.
The reason short hair is masculine is because in the First World War, men went into the trenches, had to have short hair because of the lice. So that's how long it takes to get something to be normal, or for something to be seen as femme or masc.
The underlying motivation here is...
So again, something as feminine or masculine, again, this is social constructivism to a certain degree, which maybe we can agree or disagree with, but this statement is not unfactual. This statement is not wrong necessarily. Again, I don't know the exact history of there may be a bit of hyperbole on her and a bit of shortening of the time, because I do believe short hair was not 100%, like there was short hair prior to obviously the World War I and stuff like that. But what she's probably talking about is the much shorter, again, like short hair, like what Warren Smith and Konstantin Kisin has, the buzz cut or anything like that. Much shorter hair. Is that going to be something you see a lot of in pre-World War I or in the 1800s, 1700s? You're actually not, really. Maybe objectively you might, because some of them are shaving their head and then putting on a powdered wig, because that was popularized by, was it Louis the 14th, Louis the 16th? I don't know, some shit like that. Along with just general other upper class kind of things. And they might also do it to prevent lice and stuff like that. But they would have the objective reality of a shaved head, but then they would present through their socialization long hair by wearing a wig. So it's obvious they want to have long hair, but there is an objective reality that prevents them from having said long hair. So they instead fake it, if you will. And then people associate haircuts, and again, the idea of long hair is, again, you could look into history, look at a lot of historical figures, pre kind of industrial revolution, modernization. A lot of them have longer hair, shoulder length hair, much longer hair. Or again, it wasn't so overwhelmingly dominant. Men could have short hair or much longer hair. Really, really long hair, not usually. Depending on the culture, you might see this differently. But Western culture, they would have kind of longer hair. Her length of hair or about that length. But this really, really much shorter 3 inches cut, 2 inches cut, maybe 4 inches at most. This kind of much shorter hair was more masculine, but we didn't see this change to where now if you had longer hair, it's seen as unmasculine. If you had shoulder length hair, or maybe slightly longer shoulder length hair back in the 1800s, early 1800s or whatever, you would not be seen as feminine. It would not be seen as feminine hair. Our argument is, hey, this changed. This changed. This is pretty accepted social, cultural studies information. Like, conservative minds have come to this agreement. Liberal minds, leftist minds, they've all seen this and seen this trend in history. Many different historians and critics of culture and society and sociologists have come to this conclusion. So this is not crazy to say or see that there has been a change over time, in that these changes also affect how we perceive, to a certain degree, gender, feminine things, masculine things.
To be normal, or for something to be seen as femme or masc.
The underlying motivation here is her frustration with the Western framework she views as being imposed on people.
We're so...
Her underlying, like, okay, is it wrong to have like beliefs? I don't understand. Like, it feels weird that the only people who are allowed to have strong beliefs and to express things are more conservative elements. What's wrong with this? Why is there such an exasperation or irritation? Like, oh, she is upset and frustrated with the Western framework. Well, okay. Are you going to take to task the preacher because they might be talking about the need to the importance of religion in society and the need to foster greater social kind of engagement, especially among the youth, with the church and with Christianity, because obviously he's frustrated with the way in which the Western secular society and culture, he's frustrated with it and the results he sees coming from this? I'm not sure I agree or disagree with her, but I don't know why are we taking her to task for this?
Obsessed with our own frameworks, and we really do think there's no truth outside them. But one of the lenses I'm looking at this through is I'm adopted.
In order to make this argument, she uses the example of orphans.
Orphans were massive scapegoats in Victorian times. And if my mum and dad had gone around saying to people, this is our daughter, and people had found out I was adopted, they would have thought they were fantasists or liars, because you can't argue with biology.
You're conflating social constructs with biology.
No, again, this is one of those things where, again, with the transgender thing, is that they cannot accept, because maybe a few extremists have said this, but they cannot accept that the majority of transgender activists or transgender kind of studies isn't saying your biology like changes when you become transgender or you choose to, or they aren't 100% making that argument. Some are making some have made the argument, and again, this is more the transmedicalist position, is that there are certain biological things, mind makeup, structure, brain structure, neurochemical stuff, blah, blah, blah. Much like how some people might have certain structured brains that are more susceptible to, I don't know, addiction. I don't know. I wouldn't see that. I don't want to necessarily make that argument because it's not necessarily a 100% flaw. But again, the argument is more that that argument goes, there might be some biological kind of elements that can lead to, or potentially could lead to, the individual's conscious, psychological state being of such that they need to express themselves as as a gender to which does not match their sex, I guess. Again, and her discussion here is this is just not crazy.
Massive scapegoats in Victorian times. And if my mum and dad had gone around saying to people, this is our daughter, and people had found out I was adopted, they would have thought they were fantasists or liars, because you can't argue with biology.
You're conflating social constructs with biology.
Again, she's not. As far as I've seen, there has been no argument that she is saying that if the bus drivers dress as clowns, they become biological clowns. Or if we were to take this into a different thing, like if a tiger were to change their coloration and stripes because of environmental pressures to where they need to look more like a deer, their fur needs to look more deer-like. I don't think she's making the argument that the tiger eventually becomes a fucking deer. What she's saying is that when you, the hunter, look out into the world and you see tiger stripes, you think tiger. And when you see what looks like, even though you haven't made the 100% identification, you just see a little patch of fur and you see deer fur, you think deer. But the thing is that the only reason you think that is based upon social conditioning and whatnot. It is entirely possible you could see fur, brown fur, and if I were to say brown fur, you like, oh, well, I've seen this brown fur dozens of times. It's a deer. And then you go around the tree thinking, oh, it's just a deer. I'll be safe. And no, it's a brown fucking bear. Oh, look at that. Again, like, I'm not even sure I 100% agree with the potential the potential answers or the potential point she wants to eventually make. But none of this is weird. And again, you keep saying, again, I need to see more where she's making the conflation of biology and social construction constructs. There is no one-to-one. At most, what I would suggest or think that she's making is that she is suggesting that our psychological and social identification of biological reality is based upon social constructed ideas. We have some degree of biological identifying markers, but these markers, as they are conceived in our mind through language, through, again, because language has a lot to do with how we construct ideas, and it's a very, very tricky, weird thing, that these things have changed, can change. Now, does that mean that it changes the biology of the thing we are observing? Perhaps not. Probably not. Almost certainly not. But what it does do is it does change our psychological identification of that, our social identification of that. And again, she's using an example of, again, the idea of adoption. If her parents at a certain time had said, this is our daughter, and then the person, the Warren Smith, said, oh, well, this is your daughter when she born. I didn't realize you had ever been pregnant. And then the mother responds, well, no, I wasn't pregnant. I adopted her several years ago when she was a very, very small child. Warren Smith is going to go, well, she can't possibly be your fucking child. That's a social construct of weirdness. Or like there's something weird here. That would be how he would respond back in the day, back in the 1800s. Now we've normalized to where, okay, being the daughter of somebody or having a child does not necessarily mean the pure biological reality of giving birth. It also implies the socialization, cultural, the actions one takes, the material and social actions one takes as a mother. So being a mother or a father, being a parent, is not just about the biological reality of intercourse and the germination of the egg and the zygote and all. It's not just that. It's all the stuff that comes after. Thus, it is possible to have a family that is not biologically related. There are possibilities of having a child that's not biologically related. Now, again, he's saying, well, she's conflating these things. I don't think she is. I think he wants to do that because, again, this is attack to where this is the only mode of attack that I have seen, kind of this more weirdly centrist, right-leaning, anti-trans oddness that I've seen with a lot of intellectuals. Is the only thing they have is they constantly are trying to make it so that the argument is always about there is the biological and then the social reality, and these crazy people are constantly trying to tell you you can change your gender just by socialization or change your sex. I haven't seen that.
And so we did argue with biology, and we won. There is absolute precedence for human beings to be fluid in gender and for them to be gender non-conforming.
She's describing social perceptions evolving, but the perception does not change the biological reality. That's the core.
Again, notice this is literally the only argument that ever comes up. Yes, but what it seems to be, most transgender activists seem to be arguing is not a change to biology. They're arguing a change in the social fabric. When they're asking you to call them by their preferred pronoun of she or he, they are not asking you to change, do a magic fucking trick and change the objective reality of existence around you. What they're asking you to do is performative social things. So they're asking you to do things or say things that are social constructs. Congratulations. This is the weirdest thing. You're like, what? She's not arguing this. I'm not even sure I agree 100% with all of this. Again, I don't know her argument in the chapter too well. I'm not even sure I agree 100%, but that's just not her fucking argument. I'm getting frustrated with Warren Smith because he seems to just be devolving into nonsense because I don't know who he's fucking talking to at this point.
Or problem with her entire thesis.
It's a Western framework that delivers us orphans.
Yeah,
Do you see what I mean?
I see what you mean, but I don't agree. And the reason is that I'm not a Western person by birth, and Frances has experiences of outside. And the idea that male and female are Western categories is just not, it's not true.
She describes it as a Western framework.
Okay. Again, the ideas of male and female are not Western categories. I'm going to deal with Konstantin Kisin's just absolute density. Like, I'm sorry, if you want to talk purely biology, don't interview a sociologist or a psychologist or anything else. Interview a fucking biologist and just piss off. If you are utterly, this is like one of those things where you're dealing with somebody who has no imaginative framework, or somebody who can't imagine like pictures in their heads. They can't do hypotheticals. They can't actually deal with concepts and conceptual thinking. Like, but you know, it's not a Western thing to have categories of male and female. No, but the framework of what that is, from how we engage with it sociologically, how we engage with it culturally, how we engage with it interpersonally, that framework is very malleable. And at best, it is again, the biological reality is a reference that we use. It is actually not, again, because when you see somebody, you're seeing object bouncing off of them. You're seeing an object, you're seeing something, and your mind is having to process light and data that light data into a thing. You are not biologically connected to them, like a cell in your, like some kind of virus in your body might be doing biological aspects to you or changes to you inside of your biology. You aren't connected to them. Not biologically and not psychologically. You are not a hive mind, and you are not, what the hell is that's movie Slither. At the end of Slither, you have this big old weird abomination that is this amalgamation of people as it slowly absorbs, and then they all kind of get absorbed into this big mass of tentacles and weird shit. It's fun little movie with Nathan Fillion. Fun little horror movie. Silly. You're also not that. This is what they're kind of like. This is the silliness of their argument. Is like, well, there's a biological reality. Yeah, but you have very little connection to that. In fact, more often than not, you are never biologically connected to another individual unless you are currently engaged in kissing them or having intercourse with them. You're not biologically engaged with them, or you're punching them or they're punching you. They're not interacting unless they touch you, or they breathe on you, or they piss on you, or they shit on you, or there's some kind of biological objective connection between you and the other individual. You are not engaging with them in a biological manner. So the idea of the biological reality of sex is not as important as the sociological and cultural perception of sex, which is what we call gender. So again, she's talking about that. She's not a biologist. She's not a sex biologist who looks at, reproductive aspects. She's not looking at she's not a virologist or something like that looks at how people spread diseases and engage on biological terms. But she's us. Let's just play.
Work.
But
In categories, it's not true.
And again, they all, and more importantly, this idea, it's a Western framework. Yeah, she has a very specific problem. She might write a book in 5 years that talks about the issues with the Eastern aspects, or Japanese or more or Chinese gendered ideas and whatnot. But right now, she lives in the West, and she's going to deal with the Western framework of sex, of how we deal with gender and our prescriptions and framework of this.
And the idea that male and female are Western categories is it's not true.
I don't think she said that. What she said, again, we'll go back.
Biological reality. That's the core problem with her entire
Let's see what does she actually say?
thesis.
it's a Western framework that delivers us orphans.
Yeah,
Do you see what I mean?
It's a Western framework. Again, she was dealing with her specific concept here. The Western framework that delivers orphans, or that kind of box orphans into, at least back at the time, into you are not their child. You are an adopted thing. And this has major social and cultural repercussions, which is what she's primarily talking about. That these social and cultural consequences and reactions and repercussions can also materialize in objective reality things, such as if I'm adopted by a multi-billionaire, which if there's any billionaires who would like to adopt me, adopt a 37-year-old English academic, I'm willing to do that. I will call you Papa. But so long as I'm given the will, that's a big thing. So we can see from a social standpoint how social can have objective things. she's adopted by her parents. Back in the 1800s, if she wanted to lay claim, or even the 1600s or something like that, by the 1800s, I think this had changed a little bit, but if she wanted to lay claim to the estate after her parents died, there might be some serious problems, especially if they had a child after they adopted her. So they adopted her, and then maybe the father and the mother happen to have a child, and she has a younger sister, and they're going to give it to the oldest sibling. The social and cultural makeup at the time, depending on the time period, she would not get it. Even though the parents want her to have it, even the younger child might want her to manage the estate because they just want a stipend so they can run about and have fun. She might not get it because she is not the oldest blood relative. She is the oldest living adopted sibling, adoptive child, but adoption, you're not seen as a true valid heir. You're not seen as a true valid child of these people. Only the blood-related child is. So she's talking about that framework, and she's now making that a comparison to how we determine sex. Again, I'm not sure if I 100% see this, but it's not illogical. It's not strange. And again, this weird anti-intellectual. This is so, like, again, pseudo-intellectualism pretends like it will actually play, but it actually doesn't play by any of the rules. It doesn't engage in the game of intellectual debate and intellectual inquiry, which is oftentimes a give and take thing. The pseudo-intellectuals are the bratty Cartman kid who only plays by his rules, constantly is saying, you didn't get me, I got you. No, I'm allowed to kick twice in kickball, or kick more times because it's my ball. And if you don't do this, I'm going to take it home. Nuh-uh, I don't lose because I always start out with a 5-point lead. They're the kid who doesn't actually play the game. They don't want to lose. They only want to win. They don't actually want to play the game. All they want is everyone else is just there to be servants to them. Everyone else is there to serve their need to be validated by a social environment. That's a big thing with pseudo-intellectualism, is it has nothing to do with the other side. They are utterly narcissistic sons of bitches. And this right here, again, I know, okay, he's maybe trying to do a little bit of pushback, but there seems to be so little actual engagement with this idea, especially for this being an interview. This isn't a debate. They're just interviewing you. If you're interviewing somebody because they're interested in their theories, that's okay. That makes sense. But like, they're interviewing like it's, I'm going to interview you. I disagree 100%. I want to debate you. Well, then it's a debate. It's not a fucking interview. Don't interview. Don't tell somebody it's going to be an interview and then come in. The setup is weird. Again, this is weirdly abusive almost. I hate to use that word because it sounds kind of sad and weird. But it's almost kind of, you're abusing the social setting and the social contract that is being established between interviewer and interviewee. Yes, interviewers can ask hard and hitting questions or whatever and kind of engage with that stuff, but there has to be a give and take, and I'm not seeing a lot of give. I'm just seeing this weird, obstinate, stiff-backed, I refuse to engage with hypotheticals because they're not real. I know what reality is. And again, Warren Smith is not doing very well himself.
You mean, but I don't agree. And the reason is that I'm not a Western person by birth, and Frances has experiences of outside. And the idea that male and female are Western categories is just not.
Yeah. But again, the categories that you might have seen in Eastern and Western, they might differ slightly, or they might differ in some degrees. That actually proves kind of her point. Is that this Western framework proves her point a bit, and then they're saying, oh well, these categories are universal in general. Yes, there are going to be some overlap because there is a overlap between use in many ways. The utility of the sex oftentimes is expressed in the social and cultural kind of presentation of it. Sure, but that's not all there is to it. There's clearly a lot of other stuff that has nothing to do with biological reality that is classified as feminine or that is classified as masculine. And the fact that you guys seem utterly incapable of dealing with this fucking idea that's on you.
It's not true.
She describes it as a Western framework.
But you see
Yes.
what I mean about
Well,
indigenous societies?
Yes, but indigenous societies are like 0.0001% of the entire population of human beings on the planet.
Who gives a shit? I just genuinely, who gives a shit about their size? I don't get this. Oh, but it's because it's not mass popularity. Yeah, but it's mass popularity within their particular culture. 30% of 10 million people doing this action normalizes it if they do it for 10 years, like the bus driver thing. Maybe. The thing is that it would also be true in 100 people. This would also be true in many other smaller things. So this doesn't necessarily counter her idea here. And again, you're trying to bring it up like this. Well, everyone else agrees to this. Well, again, half their agreement is based upon really flimsy assumptions and ideas and things that have changed in the past.
And the more east you go, the more the traditional societies are, and the more the male and female rigidity is enforced.
Notice how she says white Christian colonizers. This is very common.
When, let's be honest, white Christian colonizers came and turned up. They said that's not a thing and you're not allowed to do that. And said that that's wrong, and there was a lot of shaming that's gone on. Now, that obviously has infiltrated into the Aboriginal population now.
And somehow she starts making...
Okay. So we might have some disagreement with her. That's fine here, because I'm not much of a social constructivist. I'm somewhat a social constructivist. But to explain her what she's probably talking about here, to a certain extent, or the more reasonable understanding here is, let's just say this box, left and right, up and down, is the framework of what is masculine in Western society, Western Christian society. And then they're going to say, well, Eastern societies are even more rigid and whatnot here. And let's just say right side is more rigid and left side is more progressive. Here is what she's noticing. This second box I should have drawn in a different color. Box 1, box 2. This box 2, is the Eastern. What she's trying to present or give you an idea is they want to focus only on this box right here and imply that this is the correct direction to go to a certain degree, or that seems to be kind of the weird way in which they're trying to go. I don't know. Sometimes they're contradictory to themselves, but this shows the objective reality of sex and gender. So gender is objective reality, or based on objective reality, and we can't possibly. It's obvious that because the Eastern ones are even more rigid in their male and female roles. The problem is that, let's just say this is, again, the male role. This part right here, this part of the box of 2 and this part of the box, there's no overlap. So in here, this constitutes all the things that are masculine in Western society. This constitutes all the things that are masculine in Eastern society. Why are these things not appearing there? Why isn't this a perfect overlap? What she's saying is that when the white Christian kind of culture comes in, they say these things are not masculine. Don't do them anymore. Now, part of the reason why this is of interest to her is because for box 1, some of these things, we'll ignore the conservative side here for a second and conservation, just box, this is some of these actions right here were deemed masculine in the Eastern society, according to box 2, but according to box 1F, they were deemed as feminine. And they said, you can't do these anymore, indigenous men. You must only do these. These are okay. This right here is okay. You know, this is okay. We're good with this. But you also need to do these things. You also need to do that. And that right there, that modification, that change, that alteration eliminates this box right here, where there might have been things, maybe long hair, wearing dresses, certain cultural and social things that, from the perspective of society one, they deemed that as feminine. And they said, no, men, you can't do that. But from society two included that in the box of masculine actions. This is not that hard to figure out.
And there was a lot of shaming that's gone on. Now, that obviously has infiltrated into the Aboriginal population now.
And somehow she starts making the argument that there's homophobia in Aboriginal tribes as a result of the West.
So, again, I don't like, and again, this is something I have encouraged, so I'm going to give Warren Smith a little bit of points here, is that this is something that within certain post-colonial studies and especially like studies of whiteness and culture, that I will give a little credence to, because it is annoying when they try to blame all the blame of society and all of society's ills on this. But again, intellectual engagement with this, which again he should be doing, because all he does is bring up the problems. I used to teach in again, just standard writing courses, but literature courses, whatever, is that one of the best ways, and the ways in which you do proper intellectual disagreement when you're thesis writing, with your essay writing and your argumentative stuff, is that you need to represent the opposition fairly. You need to have a moment in your paper where you spend a couple of pages or whatever detailing out, without extreme criticism, depending on how long. Sometimes it's just a paragraph or two, but sometimes it's fairly long, where you detail out, without any of your personal little comments, the foundation and the ideas and the logic and the construction of your opposition, without any color commentary, without any snide little remarks of how this is obviously stupid, but let's continue on. They also believe blah, blah, blah. Well, that's dumb. Like, you don't want to do that. And again, maybe that's not that, but again, you would want to represent it wholly, to put it on your shoes, to show mastery. I know what my opposition thinks. And the reason why I think they're wrong is here. I can present their argument in full, clear understanding. And then I can show the strengths of it, but also the weaknesses. And this is where you come in back with your argument. Again, sometimes you can have a back and forth, a 1-2 punch, to where it's their argument, then your counter argument. That's fine. That's all stylistically and whatever. But oftentimes, this is an issue that I see with a lot of YouTube people or whatever, is where sometimes they will look at certain sections of a book and they'll go, oh my God, this person's arguing for this. They're clearly not a ally. Or, oh, this person's arguing for this. They're clearly a crazy liberal or a crazy leftist or something like that. And when I read through that, and I'll read through the book, I'll see, well, you missed the context right here. They're not arguing in favor of this. What they're just trying to explain is, here's the logic and idea of this particular framework, of this particular idea, this theory. And they're just not shitting on it immediately because they're intellectually, well, they're not intellectual frauds. This has merit, but I'm also going to argue against it later on in chapters, or I'm going to point out some flaws eventually. But for at least a few pages, we're going to pretend, we're going to play like we're this side, and we're going to present this side's argument in full. He's not doing that here. And again, he is not nearly well enough. So the problem of this, yes, there are quite a few academics, and maybe her, who are blaming a lot of society ills on here. But again, what she's talking about here when it comes to homophobia is, remember this box right here. After this effect, let's just say we change after the effect. So this stuff right here is in question. This the 2M, we'll do a 2M. All of the people who do these kind of actions here, these actions, they are automatically seen as perfectly fine and good. There is no question. Any men of society 2M engaging with society 1M doing these actions are a little questionable. We're not sure. They're not within the perfect box of masculine, which usually means that they end up in box of feminine, even if they didn't. But let's just pretend that there are some actions that are hard to say. Sometimes they get called masculine, sometimes not, whatever. But these actions right here, if any of society 2M, which again, doing these actions was normal. Remember this box here was 2M. 2M automatically get here. Any members of 2M, masculine men who engage in an activity that, according to their indigenous culture, was masculine, it goes all the way to here. But 1M perceives these actions as feminine. Thus, you must be a divergent. Either you're a woman or you're a homo. You're a homosexual. You are the feminine man. You are the wrong man. You are a divergent, a deviant. And you can be classified stuff, and you would be discriminated against. But again, this particular form of discrimination right here, this one right here, this one definitely comes from here. Because 2M, the normal indigenous society, was perfectly fine with these actions right here. These actions were fine. But according to 1M, these actions are bad. Or these actions are deviant. So we could certainly say when it comes to the indigenous culture and this particular moment and framework, this form of bigotry comes about from this one's redefining of what is masculine, and it's imposing on the indigenous population. This is not a radical or strange or crazy or stupid idea. Now, if you were to say all forms, like maybe there's certain things where these actions are considered masculine, and let's just say there's actions here, it wraps around horseshoe, is that these actions right here, going over to here, this is what the indigenous culture 2M2 sees as feminine. Now notice there's a bit of overlap here. So there's certain actions that the colonizing, the colonizer, if we were to call them that, and they might be colonizers, the 1M culture, there are certain actions that are perceived by 2M as feminine. So men from culture 1 behaving in this way is perfectly masculine according to the viewpoint of culture 1. But from the viewpoint of culture 2, it is viewed as feminine. So men acting as females oftentimes is a source of derision, and again, they may have certain degrees of bigotry. What people like to do on the social constructive side, the more extremists, they like to combine both of these together and say, this is bigotry, and it's all caused by the colonizer. When in reality, half of this might be caused by the colonizer, the other half might be caused by the indigenous population's own internal prejudices that they already had. A more fair understanding would be this, understanding that these elements, sometimes there's shared characteristics, sometimes there's not, sometimes there's overlap, sometimes there's not, sometimes there's all manner of stuff happening. But the big thing is understanding this is a more complicated matrix here. That's not really, again, the response from Warren Smith doesn't seem to be suggesting that he understands that or is going to give that weight.
As a result of the West.
But there's a lot of homophobia in the Aboriginal population that didn't exist before it was imposed.
But you're not
That, again, this is this matrix. That's what she's saying right there.
addressing my argument. My argument is not that there aren't indigenous communities where these practices exist. My argument is that that is by far and away a tiny minority of.
It's only a tiny minority because it didn't become a dominant one. Again, you're assuming a naturalistic fallacy. This is almost like a divine right kind of argument, is that, the Great Britain and England conquered the world not because of social, cultural, and economic factors that made it beneficial to them and certain aspects that they did. No, they did it because of some kind of ultimate objective reality that they are better, like their culture is better, and somehow it affects the actual. It's hard to parse this because it actually doesn't make sense when you start taking it. Is that it almost seems to be suggesting that their objective reality of being British or England during this time made it just. It's natural. It is defined. It is definitive. It's almost God-given divine destiny that you will have tons of colonies across the world. You'll conquer major part of India and overthrow things, and you'll have all of this stuff. It's just going to happen. This makes less fucking sense, honestly. And again, he's making this argument. It's like, oh, well, and again, you're like, well, that's not who he's arguing. But again, he's trying to make this argument that, again, they're a tiny population. So why should we care about this? Well, we care about it is because just kind of like, again, like microbes are tiny. That doesn't mean that it's not important or it's a small minority of things. Yes. But what we can see from this is that, again, it is not natural. It is not a divine existence. It's not 100%. The British didn't conquer the world because God favored them. The British didn't conquer the world because they are genetically and biologically or objective reality materially superior or better. They didn't conquer the world because they were in a better position on their island from like an objective. Like none of these things necessarily follow. But this is where his argument actually leads up. The fact that, oh, well, they're just a small thing, so we shouldn't pay attention to them. Part of the reason why we're paying attention to them is because we can see that, again, these things didn't just spawn into fucking existence. These things did not evolve from a biological reality. They are instead evolving from a complex mixture of social and cultural signs, signifiers, and interactions, and developing behaviors based upon themselves. It's a recursive thing. Social and culture influences itself and causes itself to a certain degree, but also there are biological factors. But then these biological factors, people are looking at them differently and exposing them differently and explaining them differently and coming up with different theories and different mythologies and different stories. This is not rocket science.
The global population of humans.
I don't really understand how that matters, though.
Constantine challenges her on this, and
yeah, he challenges her with a really stupid fucking argument, Warren. And you're, again, support of this. Again, I don't understand how you're supportive of an argument that is really on the basis has zero fucking to do with what she's talking about. She's not talking about what is most likely to have happened, what cultural and social and what social and cultural connotations of feminine and masculine were most likely to happen based upon mass existence and who had the most people or the most widespread influence. She's not talking about that. This has nothing to do with that. What, again, she's trying to do to a certain degree is to show that within small communities, and we can take this and extrapolate out to large communities, is that if enough people do an action over a long enough time, you can change. There is a normalcy, the idea of normal things. And this is very much culturally and socially malleable. Hence why you might see within indigenous populations behavior here Like if they're less than. So there's only this 2M is the indigenous population, and it's the minority population, or minority as far as social control, economic control, and other factors. And then 1M is the majority. You will see these factors right here because 1M saw these as bad and feminine and improper for men to do. You might see 2M change to where they'll stop doing these actions. They might still do these. They might still do these. And they might do a bit more of this. A bit more of M, right? They might do their box changes to this. Rather than being this, boundaries, it changes to this. Again, this is why Konstantin's comment is nonsensical, and why she says that doesn't matter. And again, Warren Smith doesn't get it. I do not understand how he doesn't get this.
I don't really understand how that matters, though.
Konstantin challenges her on this, and she just cannot contend with it. So she
cannot contend. She cannot contend. Well, part of the reason she can't contend with is because it's nonsensical. It's not inappropriate. It doesn't. Again, if I'm talking about addition and the rules of addition, and then you bring up multiplication, even if it might be mathematical or whatever, or division, it's not really. And again, you're not bringing up division and seeing how it's similar to addition, just in kind of a weird abstract manner. You're just literally bringing. But what about multiplication? What do you mean? I'm talking about addition right now. I'm talking about something else. Like, could this interaction with it? Perhaps, but I'm not talking about that right now. I'm not talking about what is most likely to happen. I'm talking about what can happen based upon certain factors. And again, this idea, this wording right here, he challenges her and she can't possibly engage with it.
Team challenges her on this, and she just cannot contend with it. So she does what most people do in this situation and diverts.
Do you know why indigenous populations are so small, though?
That's not a diversion. It's a conversation. Conversations develop. If at most you see this as a diversion, let's say it's diverting. That's like saying a road that turns slightly to the left. You're on a highway. Is a highway perfectly goddamn straight the entire time you're on it? No. It may turn. She's following this. So like, okay, he brings up this idea. All right. It doesn't really have any point. But tell you what, I'll play the game. You want to talk about the number of people. You want to talk about percentages of people. You want to talk about the reason why, because he's saying, oh, I'm chewing a Skittle here. They're in front of me and I can't resist them. One of my favorite candies. Anyway, she's saying, we can see within these things, irregardless of how likely these things are to have massive appeal, we can see that these communities develop different than this community. And he's saying, well, hold on a second. This other community is really, really big. And this other one's really, really small. So why does it matter what they do? That they do it differently, because it's not going to affect us because they're so small. I'm going to try to take this. I'm taking the argument a little bit to explain why she's making this shift, divergence, this dodge, as Warren Smith is very bad faith interpreting, is one could take the logical step of Kisin's argument is that it doesn't matter because their idiosyncrasies in the expression of gender do not matter because they are so small that they could not possibly have a large enough impact on the majority culture, on the majority, to warrant any study. Basically, if you have a society of 100 million people, 1,000 people doing something weird and different, like being furries doesn't mean that everybody's going to be furries. Sorry, furries. Don't mean to bag on you too much here, but let's just say it's weird and divergent. Doesn't mean that, oh, well, they're all going to be furries. And that doesn't mean that becoming a furry is somehow not a complete, utter aberration of existence. What she's now going to bring up is like, well, okay, so you want to talk about probability. And you seem to think that there's this divine existence that said this is going to be the way it is, and that's why the majority culture is the majority. She's now going to respond to this, respond to the logic of his argument. It's not a dodge. It's literally just developing and kind of going onto a little track. It's a little thing, but he's the one who's constantly pushing this way. Kisin brings this up. Is this, if you have a society of, let's make it a little bit smaller. Let's say 10,000 people. And of this 10,000, only say 100 of them are furries. Our argument, I'm just going to take a guess on this, is like, okay, yeah, but see, that's today. Back when these furry cultures first introduced themselves, there was about 10,000 Englishmen who are non-furries, and there was about 10,000 indigenous furries. When the 10,000 Englishmen, good proper Englishmen, good logical Englishmen, came over, they fucking killed all of the indigenous furries. In a war of conquest and colonization and extreme actions. So yes, there was a war, a material war, and that means that the losers, their culture tends to not be as represented as strongly in those cultural ideas. Again, there's nothing that says that this was natural or unnatural or something like that. Like, again, we could have a society, if we were to look at this, and let's just say there's a country we never discovered, a landmass out in the middle of the Pacific. Large, the size of like Russia, big one. And we look at this, and this has several countries, and as we go in there and investigate, it has several different countries, and this thing has had wars just like Europe. And there's been changing borders over the many centuries and several thousand years of human development. But they're all fucking furries. Millions and millions and millions of people living now, but also dead, going back generations to the furry Cleopatra, who dressed like a cat. And then we're like, well, that's strange and that's weird. The thing is like, well, no, because they didn't have a culture that was so, every time a country, the furry France, conquered furry Italy, the thing that wasn't questioned was furrydom, the nature of being a furry. Other things changed. They had their form of furry Christ. They had their form of furry Catholicism, furry Judaism, all those things. And maybe it just so happens that the furry Judaism happened to, through various economic and cultural things, become the dominant one, very strong military back in the 1920s of this furry continent. And they conquered most of the continent. So now everyone on that continent is a Jewish furry, or the majority of it is. And the indigenous Catholic furries are the minority, and they don't have nearly, and culturally and socially, you would look at the markets, you would look at the stuff, the media that they produce, and they would all say, yeah, it's fairly Jewish and furry Jewish. This is what she's talking about. Again, they're trying to use math, but they're trying to use math or like the idea that because transgenderism is so rare and strange and whatever, it's nonsensical, we shouldn't be paying attention because it's odd or whatever. But part of but this argument then goes kind of crazy because they constantly are relying on it, even when it's inappropriate, such as here. This doesn't make any sense. This logically does not make sense.
Isn't it?
The point I'm trying to make to you is...
Do you know why they're so small?
Hold on a second.
But do you know why they're so small?
You're deflecting from the argument that I'm making.
Shut the fuck up, dude. I'm actually getting angry. I've long since lost. I gave you as good as faith as possible, but you are not doing this right.
Really?
Yes, you are.
And this goes on for a while.
When you said this is a Western concept, I gave you examples. You made the claim that outside of the West,
Yeah.
in indigenous societies, these things are very normal. And the point I'm making to you is, while it may be the case in certain tiny communities that
No,
exist,
but-
hold on a second, that exist in certain tiny communities, bless you, Francis, outside of the
Oh, that guy's name is Francis, I guess. All right.
West. There are also lots of other civilizations outside of the West where the gender binary that you were talking about as a Western concept is actually much more firmly enforced than it is.
So again, this doesn't necessarily defeat her, but it could. So he's elaborated a little bit on this, but again, that's really wasn't where his argument was, and honestly, I wouldn't have taken this. But again, so he's basically making the idea that these independent, small little cultures that she's looking at, these indigenous cultures that have these broader gender rolled kind of constructs, they are aberrations from a sociological, anthropological examination. They're aberrations in that there are many other Eastern cultures or non-Western cultures. So one, we can't blame the West for this, even though that's not really what she was saying necessarily. It's not something unique to Western culture in the sense that it was divinely made this way to be repressive or whatever, but more just that this is how kind of the cards, this is how the cookie crumbled. Is that the West ended up becoming a dominant culture in many of these areas, and they imposed their thing. And then he's again kind of counter this. Well, they're aberrations, but even within the more strict ones, again, her argument is, again, it's like they can't understand a example or an analogy, or this is an example of something that if we apply it broadly, again, he doesn't want it to apply broad, which maybe he can make an argument like that, but
in the West.
Fabric of reality has been reflected in societies East, West, since the beginning.
The fabric of reality has been reflected, yes. But, again, for somebody who's supposed to be very much focused in philosophy, doesn't seem to understand that our perception, that reflection implies that there is a perception of that, which implies that the individual and the social is coming into play, and how we perceive those reflections. Those reflections are not naturally born necessarily. They are instead socially constructed. We construct ideas and thoughts and language to explain out in short form or longer form very complex interactions, and it's messy, not really perfect. And again, he just wants to it's just bad.
Beginning of human history.
You're still talking about an Abrahamic framework.
Okay, what about the Chinese?
I don't know. I haven't looked into the Chinese.
It's not just a construct of the West, and that's Konstantin's central point here.
The problem is that, again, none of this has anything to do, and it doesn't actually really attack her argument. I'm being honest with you guys. This doesn't really attack her argument. Because, again, her argument is that from the Western perspective, now you might say, well, hold on, Eastern has these things. How much have they actually studied of China? He brings up, well, what about China? Have you studied China? Have you seen this? More importantly, if you have, you would also notice that there's, again, much like with China, there's certain behaviors in China that do overlap with Western culture. So maybe we could say this is the core. These things right here are objective, can't. These are the objective reflections of objective of sexuality. I'm writing on a very tiny part here because it's at the bottom of the. Terrible. Objective reflections of sex. Okay. What she's going here is, yeah, but all of these edge cases, these other things right here, these things are manufactured. And even this middle stuff right here that's not overlapping, this stuff is also culturally constructed and manufactured. You guys only ever want to focus on this, and you want to insist that everything you believe fits in this box. The problem is that what we'll often see is that they're trying to say that all of this right here fits within this box right here. But it doesn't. It's not. There are many examples, many aspects that are not kind of doing this. And again, like this is a dishonest framework.
Here,
Pseudo-intellectual dishonest framework.
That come together to create new life, and they have their own terms for these things, but that's a biological reality of male and female.
If you really look at what I'm saying, is that there are other frameworks that are perhaps more human, that are more,
What
that
makes
are
them
less
more human?
Well, they're less driven by control.
Notice the word of control. This is the Marxist idea that it's all about power rather than an actual reflection of reality.
By controlling regimes.
Okay. So he throws up the boogeyman of Marxists, because of course it had to come up. Boogeyman Marxist, power and control, because again, that's not important. Dominant cultures, and it's not about having power and maintaining things. These things aren't important to study. These things aren't important to notice at all. It's not important to notice at all, and we're not supposed to notice. These things are. This isn't about power. This is about objective reality. It's simply objective reality that these things happened. It's just, it's just divinely said that, of course, culture had to look exactly this way because that's where we were evolving to. There was no social or cultural kind of influence on this at all. We were bound and destined to be exactly the way we are in our Western society. And there's no power, there's no control. It's all Marxist craziness.
Human.
Well, they're less driven by control.
Notice the word of control.
And again, there are aspects, again, there is a degree of, again, Western society has a strong emphasis on control. You can see this within like the 1800s and the Victorian, Edwardian era, where things were very much about appearing proper, appearing correct, and very controlled behavior. You can see this even before there. So again, this I'm sorry, I'm just not very afraid of I'm just not afraid of this. Sorry. The scare tactic doesn't work on me. I'm not scared of the crazy Marxist Leninists who are coming to come after me. Like control and regulation within West society, the idea that this is not a feature of it, and this is a feature of many of them, but again, the way maybe control is, this is probably a bad word on her part, so I'm going to give some criticisms here. She shouldn't necessarily say control, but what she's trying to get at is that East and West both are very obsessed with controlling and regulating social and cultural aspects. They just have different regulations. But that's the point she's trying to make. These regulations, these boxes, these control things to force things within the specific box. Again, maybe she should also look at Eastern studies, but I'm sorry. You can't master every goddamn thing. You can't look at every single possible, like you can, it just takes an eternity to do, and you can't make any statements until you've collected all your data. So again, she's limiting her down to, okay, how do, in the West, our Western culture, we're looking at it right now, and I'm just looking at it from a Western perspective, Western culture, what do I see here? This is what she's seeing. This is not wrong to do.
This is the Marxist idea that it's all about power rather than an actual reflection of reality.
Again, this idea of the reflection of reality is reflection of, again, this assumes so much. This assumes, one, a perfect representation, that the reflection that is perceived, that is seen, that is given off through our conscious minds or unconscious or whatever you will, that there's a reality, the real. In many ways, this is like maybe an idealist kind of position, or some kind of thing like that. There's the real object here. And then what we engage with, or what is being seen, is not the real, but the reflection of the real. And we're assuming, at best, it seems, that these things are perfect one-to-one, that the reflection is one-to-one. But we can see here the reflection isn't, because I drew that specifically to show that the reflection could be. So one, we can problematize the reflection of reality, if such a reality exists, if the real exists, if we have, I don't know whether you're going with some kind of weird idealist kind of thing, or a realist, or I don't know, materialist. Either way, this seems to be suggesting a reflection of reality. So we're not engaging with reality, we're engaging with us engaging with the reality. So we imply a perfect representation, but it also implies a perfect perception of this. Because the only way in which I can say I have seen the real, if I can't see the real and I can't see objective existence all the time, I can only engage with the reflections of objective existence. I then am assuming two things. One, that the reflection is perfect. Hence, if it's not, I'm not seeing the true real. But I'm also assuming that my ability to perceive this is perfect and perfect. So we could see problems. If I am perfect and my perception is perfect, I see things exactly as they are, but the reflection isn't true, then I don't know the real, because I am going to perceive the reflection as perfect truth, because I can see perfect truth. But again, it's kind of like this. Or we'll do this one. This looks like a 6. This looks like a 9. Based on my perception, if I am looking this direction, I see this as the 6, this is the 9. If I'm looking at it from this perspective, two people sitting down, I see this is the 6, this is the 9. Let's just say there's an objective reality of what the number actually is. The number is 58. But the reflection, because of some distortion or just an inability to do this, so the reflection is wrong. In that, let's just say no matter what direction, I see perfectly. So even when I look this direction, I know that, let's just say objectively, this is supposed to be the 6. This is supposed to be the 9. We'll add the lines there. I see, no matter what direction, I see the line right there. I know, okay, because my perception is perfect and I can understand this all. I see 6, 9. Even when looking this direction, when this is looking this direction, I see 6, 9. The problem is that what if I'm not actually perceiving the real? I'm perceiving a reflection of the real. And what if that reflection is wrong? Just by the nature of existence and reality, the real can never be actually seen. It's only a reflection, and the reflection is flawed because of some biological thing. Something. Well, maybe not biological, but some kind of objective outside of my experience reality. This thing cannot be truly represented because it's a 4-dimensional fucking object and I only see the 3 dimensions of it. And here is the true object. Well, let's just say this is perfect. This number is actually 69. We then can have the problem of imperfect perception to where I don't perceive it. So let's just pretend these guys are gone. So these guys are gone. Now, I perceive things based upon my position. I don't have perfect perception here like this right here. I don't have the question is now, this is a perfect representation, a perfect reflection of reality. But my perception of this is flawed. Maybe I can't see the lines here, or I can't see it. So I see this one. I think this is the 9, this is the 6. I look from this direction. I think this is the 6, this is the 9. But this is the true one right here. Remember? The line, if I could see these lines, let's just say I can't see these lines. They're in parentheses, I can't see them. If I could see those lines, even when I'm looking this direction, I would flip it in my head and I would know, oh, this one's supposed to be the 6, even though from this direction, this one looks like the 6. I know this one is the true 6. This is the true 9. Even from my flawed perspective. But again, if I can't see this, I think 6, 9. Even though I'm coming up with the correct answer, I'm actually not. Because objectively, the 6 is here, the 9 is here. I see this is the 6, this is the 9. I come up to something that looks like the real through an imperfect process, but it actually, again, isn't. I'm wrong. Sorry for the long-winded thing, but again, I don't understand how Warren Smith is coming to this idea. And again, maybe it's just a complete difference in philosophy. Certainly a possibility, but
controlling
You
regimes
like
or
them
controlling
more, I
religions.
get it, but I don't think that makes them more human. If 99% of humans do A, it seems to me that A is more human.
This is where it kind of goes off the rail, Konstantin.
well, that's because Constantine literally threw a fucking massive, more human. I'm not sure if that was the argument we were saying here. Again, more human. Like, again, he seems to be adding value judgments here that I don't think she necessarily was adding value subject like good and evil, right and wrong. More, again, just the idea that these things are not acceptable. It's the prohibition of this that she seems to be talking more about.
Humans do A, it seems to me that A is more human.
This is where it kind of goes off the rail. Konstantin challenges her on this idea.
Again, it's not really a challenge. It's a weird dodge thing. He's actually dodging.
Aboriginals are the oldest indigenous culture in the world. Do you know why there's so few of them? We killed them.
Yes.
We committed a genocide.
Why were we able to do that?
Yeah, so my response is going to be somewhat similar to here. I'm not really quite sure. This is getting into some weird, it's actually is kind of somewhat white nationalist. My culture is superior to yours kind of thing. Based upon power and control, which is weird. He's actually reflecting the very problem is that, because we insisted on power and control and making sure everything looked like us, we developed the tools to enforce that upon other cultures, i.e. war and whatnot. War to create conformity, even though there's war elsewhere, but we developed even greater tools because of our interconnections and European cultures and the differences between them. I could engage with this, but this is on its surface. Again, this is one really dumb on Konstantin Kisin's part, and it's kind of like a might makes right. Well, the reason why our culture is more in tune with reality is because our culture survived and other cultures didn't. But that's just kind of a silly kind of thing, because that's like saying the company, like, we can see many examples to where, even from a business standpoint, certain products are objectively better and good. It's just there was a marketing problem or wrong time, wrong place. And again, we're talking like we're trying to make morality an objective existence and gender an objective thing, through like the reason why our perception of gender is more correct is because we killed everyone else. I don't know how. It's not like we outbred them. Unless that's where he's kind of going like this. Oh, because they were more accepting of gays, they didn't have enough members of their. Unless he's going that route, then the other route he's going is that it's kind of this cultural superiority concept, which is a tricky subject. And again, there might be some merit to certain aspects of this, but again, it's trying to apply this to, again, a very specific like gender expression just feels really, really bad. Yeah, and honestly, my reaction is like I said, was very similar like this. Again, he's just saying this with such a mulishly stupid look. Like he just does not want to engage with this. I don't know how you can see him being good faith here with such an obviously dumb statement. Again, I honestly don't think he thinks a lot. This does not seem like somebody who actually really thinks about what they're saying and what they're doing. I think they justify their thinking a lot. I think they think about how they're right a lot, but I don't think they actually critically analyze what they're saying a lot. Because this deserves a response. This deserves that's stupid response. I would probably respond with something along the lines of, this is just literally a might makes objective right. That's just what it is. Might makes that because the survival. It's like a complete misunderstanding of even like the survival of the fittest evolutionary kind of thing. The strongest cultures, the more correct and objective cultures will exist and continue onwards, and the ones that are not will fall by the wayside. It's like that's not necessarily true. You can absolutely make it so that a dysfunctional culture can survive because maybe you have a high specialization in one aspect or another or because of economic or geographic privilege, for lack of a better word, for the blessing is being in the right place at the right time, or having the right idea. Again, other people might have had the ideas to establish colonies through slave trade and through ships and all that stuff way back in ancient times. So maybe they just didn't have the technology at the time because it hadn't developed enough yet. And they were developing it very, very quickly. But then there was a famine that happened that was unforeseen, a climate change thing, any manner of things. And all of a sudden, now you have a superior culture that should have dominated everything else die out. We could even look at this like, Christianity, if we want to think of it from a religious standpoint, which again, they usually sometimes take this way, is Christianity is the strongest and best religion because look how it dominated. It's kind of like this. Yeah, well, the Christianity also started out as slave thing. And honestly, it got there through fairly strange manners. And honestly, a lot of it was luck. A good chunk of it was fucking luck, and the fact that also it wasn't that divergent from other religions, or necessarily, depending on the time frame. Sometimes they were extremely divergent, obviously, but there was some degree, or again, because they had certain cultural markers, they were more accepting than other religions. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with this might makes right weird argumentation.
And she kind of finds something to be outraged by.
I'm sorry. How dare she be outraged like this? Again, I do not like the soft soy left. I really don't. I don't like the constant need to find outrage and racism and sexism. I am somebody who is very much against that. I'm somebody who is very much into open dialogue, open debate, and discussion of very difficult topics, oftentimes, and perhaps not always the kindest of manners, but we try to have good faith in everyone. But this immediate, again, this slander, honestly, it starts looking like libel and slander on the part of Warren Smith. She's trying to find something to be offensive. Rather than thinking like, look, I'm sorry, there's a degree of spice that even ignorant spice. I'm sorry if you're completely and utterly ignorant to some of the implications that you just said with that statement of essentially might makes right. But many people might find, even more conservative individuals, you were to say that in certain circumstances, they might be somewhat like a little offended, a little bit like, wow, you think just because this person is stronger in the sense of by virtue of luck and position that somehow it's more fit and right? I'm not sure I 100% agree with that. And more importantly, that it's the right to take and destroy whatever. I'm not sure I get this or agree.
Able to do that.
What are you implying?
I'm just asking you the question.
Are you implying?
To be outraged
I'm just
Able to do that.
What are you?
I'm just asking the question. No, your question is preconceived. Is predicated upon there being a truth. And you are very much implying something. This is incredibly dishonest and an example of pseudo-intellectualism. 100% on Kisin's part, and the fact that Warren Smith is not calling this out is an example of his pseudo-intellectualism. The fact that he seems to think she's the bad guy here in this debate from the perspective of somebody who's violating basic conversational and or intellectual pursuit laws. He has an implication there. And she calls him, what are you implying with that? There's an implication with this. And honestly, maybe she's asking in a bit too much of an accusatory manner. But again, he should be able to explain out the logic of his question. Because the question has to have some logical framework. It has to have a reference in his mind, hypothetical or otherwise, of objective reality, of some kind of truth or some kind of thing that he is countering her with. So the question is what are you countering me with? It's not the question, it's the thing behind the question. There's an implication here. There's an implication that, we'll look at the question again.
In the world. Do you know why there's so few of them? We killed them.
Yes.
We committed a genocide.
Why were we able to do that?
Why were we able to commit a genocide on these people? I don't know. What is the implication you are implying there? Are you somehow implying that there was... Are you asking... And again, the implication is this. If I'm asking, did God allow us to do this? The implication you could say if you were saying like, well, I'm wondering, do you believe this was some kind of divine thing? If this was a religious kind of argumentation, that would be an acceptable implication. But you should be able to answer this without dodging and running away from this. Again, he's trying to hide it like, oh, I'm just asking questions. No, if you ask a question, that means there has to be a framework in which the question is coming back from. They are presenting a reality and you are looking at it and you're making a reference to another reflection of reality, something that you have, and there's a inconsistency. There is a unexplainable phenomena that is happening in their presentation versus yours, and then you ask a question to clarify, how does this phenomena come about? Because in my reality, the phenomena comes about because of X. What she wants to know is, well, what is your justification for thinking that why this is a natural come about? Why this is a natural result? He should say X. He's not. He dodges hard.
And she kind of finds something to be outraged by.
Why were we able to do that?
What are you implying?
I'm just asking you the question.
Are you implying because we're better?
No.
What are you
We
implying?
were technologically far more advanced. That's what.
We were better technologically. Okay. So, but again, that has nothing to do with what she was talking about. She wasn't talking about the utility or the technological advancements as created by gender categories, unless that's a really long branch, like that Wikipedia game to where you go from, you got to get from the Bahamas to Shakespeare's Hamlet and clicks on Wikipedia. That's a lot of fucking clicks. There's a lot of things you got to go through to get from one place to the next, from Bahamas to Shakespeare's Hamlet. So that's if you were trying to say somehow like the technology and gender relate. So it's like, why we're talking about gender expression. Why is technological advancement okay? Well, we're more technologically advanced. So then, why are you bringing up this idea of why are you asking me? Well, why were we able to do that? If it's just technological, it's not relevant to this discussion. We're discussing gender, sexuality, sexual representations, and the connection, if you will, of an objective reality, objective sex, and to the expression through gender. And depending on what side you're on, you believe this is stronger or not as strong. What does that have to do with technological advancement and economic power? Why bring this up? This is pseudo-intellectualism. What they're trying to say is, oh, you're running away from the question. The question is invalid. Why were we able to do this? Who fucking cares? Unless you're making a dominant, better argument, like a superiority argument, it doesn't fucking matter why we were able to do that. Unless you have something else, elaborate more. Then you say, oh, then he dodges and says, or he then explains, well, we were technologically more advanced. Okay. How does that relate to gender expression? Do you believe that gender roles create a society, rigid gender roles create a society that allows for the greater advancement of technological and economic things? So therefore, these things, but again, that still leads back to the reason why is because the dominant cultures and the way we do it dominantly, the majority must be onto something right. Again, it's this appeal to the mass. It's appeal to the crowd. Everyone says this is true, so therefore it must be true. Common sense. We were able to destroy them because of this. So everything that we do, it all ties together. So the way we do things are perfect or better than other ones. That's why we win wars. Because the way we eat breakfast, the way we build things, our work culture, our gender, everything is tied to everything. So therefore, when we do something and we win out on something, that means that all aspects of that society are proven to be good. If that sounds somewhat illogical and kind of weird and kind of like, I'm not sure if it really follows, and there's way more that's way too general, broad of an argument, broad of a statement. Congratulations. This is really not good. And honestly, again, from a moral standpoint, again, even according to Western values, this idea is somewhat repugnant. So and he's just kind of staring like he clearly knows he's upset her, but he's like, he himself was upset first, which is why he's throwing this out there. And he's frustrated or whatever, he's throwing this. And now he's kind of staring at this dead-eyed, go ahead, get upset. Call me a bigot, because then I'll win. Go ahead, go do it. This is. I'm sorry. I'm not going to give a good faith anymore. I'm 5 minutes in. I'm not going to get 6 minutes in. I'm not going to give good faith on this anymore. She absolutely deserves to tear him a new asshole for being this. Oh, I'm just asking questions. Pseudo-neutral party when you are absolutely not just asking questions. And more importantly, even if you are, I'm sorry, you kind of revealed a pretty repugnant belief. And I'm sorry, maybe I'm just getting too mean and radical, but I'm tired of treating with kid gloves people who are genuinely kind of repugnant assholes who then cry and scream that we should be nice and fair. They act repugnant. And then I'm just supposed to take it on the cheek. I'm sorry, I'm not a Christian. I don't turn the other cheek.
I'm implying.
Well, in that conflict, they had vastly superior technology. On the battlefield, they were able to win the battle. It's like, well, what are you implying by that?
Yes, because we weren't... Shut up, Warren. God damn. Man, you are... God, you remind me of these know-it-all students that I had so many in classes, either as students or as colleagues, who think they're way smarter and way more intelligent. Honestly, they're fragile. They talk about, they always talk about how other people can't handle their ideas and how other people can't take criticisms and whatnot. Warren looks like a guy who would absolutely have a goddamn mental breakdown if somebody actually challenged him on anything. And he will. Like, he emotionally and psychologically, again, he won't freak out, whatever, because now at this point, he's such a narcissist, he's probably devolved in his own bullshit. I guess I shouldn't call him a narcissist. Probably. Maybe he is, I don't know. But I don't want to extend good faith on this anymore, because this is extremely dishonest framing. The fact that he can't even understand that he's trying to carry water for this question that at best was stupid, brutish, and weird. A really sideline, running away odd question with lots of implications. A good number of them are really morally and ethically odd and at odds with even Western culture. Which, again, you appear to be wanting to defend, which good for you. There's lots to defend about Western culture and Eastern and many others. Fine. But the fact that there's like, okay, yeah, the fact that Warren Smith can't go, yeah, so this question, yeah, there's a lot of it. Obviously, what she's responding to is there's some pretty heavily implications about might makes right and betterness or whatever. I'm not sure I necessarily agree with that, but I'm not really sure where Kisin is taking this. Like, it seems kind of an odd thing to bring up when we were talking about gender and gender representation. Now we were talking a bit about cultures and ideology and which cultures exist and not. And he was wanting to talk a bit about the majority versus the minority as some kind of guidepost for what is reasonable and not. Okay, we could do that. Maybe, but or I would do that, and I just did. Warren Smith is not doing this. That's a first indication of pseudo-intellectualism, is that he is not doing anything to understand the opposition and why the opposition might have a legitimate reason to respond the way they are, whether they're responding with happiness, sadness, outrage, or whatever, and said, oh, she's getting offended. I'm sorry, this is kind of a weird... This really, again, this isn't a good argument on Kisin's part. Not really. Morally and ethically, this is a pretty weird extremist idea. And the idea that her response is so outlandish, that's silly.
What's not clear about that?
So you're saying...
I'm saying we were technologically more advanced. Would you
So you're
disagree
saying we're
with that?
superior to Australian Aboriginals?
That's quite the opposite of what I'm saying.
I don't see.
No, it's not the opposite. Well, it's not the opposite because it's not the opposite. His statement could be saying it, could not be saying, but it's trying to say that's the opposite. I don't know how that's the opposite. Like, how is he now all of a sudden running away from this? Oh, I'm just saying it because we were technologically advanced. Then what the fuck did that have to do with the ideas of social gender roles, the idea of how majority and minority culture is created through minority and majority interactions? Like, what does this matter? At most, if you're taking this neutrally and you're not making a might makes right thing, then this argument is at least minorly supported of hers, in the sense that this was not decided based upon perfect natural selection and everyone just agreeing eventually through long-form interactions and discussions and debates and introspection and academic study, that the Western way of doing things is not the Western way. It's just the normal way. And the Eastern way, there's this core ideology. There's this core perfect way of gender expression, or better gender expression. That wasn't developed through a nice process. That was the only reason this one came into being is because of mass genocide and a war and technological things. So that would almost lean at least a weak support towards her argument, is that these things didn't come about naturally. They came about through the force of technological advancement and destruction, not necessarily natural objective reality. This is nonsensical. And again, unless you're immediately going to come out and go, yeah, no, that makes sense.
Anything controversial about that? It seems like a pretty basic observation.
again, you are deliberately ignoring the forest for the trees on this statement and the implications of this statement, and more importantly, the implications of any argument. Again, for somebody who wants to say a philosopher, you can be very shallow at times. You are decidedly and deceptively being obtuse and just completely ignorant right now, and you know it. This is not a good look, Warren.
Observation.
I'm not saying we were superior. I'm saying we were technologically more advanced.
So how is that the opposite?
Superior implies a moral quality. I'm not making any moral implication. You seem to be, but
Okay.
what I'm saying is,
I think most people would hear it that way.
no.
Again, you're a very intelligent man. How would most people hear that?
Most people would hear what I'm saying for what I'm saying, which is
Don't think they would.
This is just an example of.
I'm sorry. I'm going to have to side with her that, again, unless you're being deliberately obtuse, the weird bringing in of why were we able to do that? Do you want me to say, well, we were more technologically advanced? Like, let's just say she engages with the question just like that. Just the way Warren, Smith, and Kisin want this to be engaged with, I guess. Well, she might say, well, we were more technologically advanced. So, the hell does this have to do with the topic and the general idea we were dealing with? This has nothing to do with this. And the only way it does have something to do with this is if you are implying a moral or some kind of objective argument of we are more correct. Like somehow you're making the objective reality of our gendered roles and expressions lead to better objective results in technology and strength and economy, which then leads to this. So you are either it's nonsensical and connected to nothing, or it is sensical and connected to it, but the implications are essentially might makes right, and it has morally and ethically questionable problems. You want to have your cake and eat it too. You want to say this to cause offense, but then run away like a little bitch. I don't like that.
Would most people hear that?
Most people would hear what I'm saying for.
No, most people don't just hear things like a robot and do not make any implications. Most people would hear that and there's a good number, a significant majority who would probably hear this. If I were to show this to dozens of people, normal average people, they would probably make, do you think it's fair that it's logical that she made the leap that he was maybe making some kind of moral we were superior argument? Most people would go, yeah, I could probably see that. Yeah, that kind of came up in my mind, but I wasn't quite sure. I didn't have enough context. But the possibility is there. So this idea of oh, well, no, you're so crazy. No one else would come to this. Only you, because you're hypersensitive, crazy person. That's
what I'm saying, which is
Don't think they would.
This is just an example of selectively finding something to be outraged with.
Not selectively finding this. Just because she is thinking in more than the most absolute one-dimensional way and trying to understand not just what you're saying, but the meaning and implications of a saying. Again, I don't know if you just don't understand language, Warren. I just don't know if you've actually studied anything when it comes to cognitive behavior, when it comes to reading and writing and language and spoken language and engagement and anything like that, anything to do with linguistics. Again, it's not my specific field of expertise. I was more of a fiction critical analysis guy, but I engaged with it enough because of my degree area. I just don't know if you just have really, or again, the other implication is that this is deliberate because you want to smear her as being crazy, which she's not. That wasn't crazy. Even if I don't necessarily agree with her outrage, not sure if I do or don't. I'm not going to make a judgment on that. But this is dishonest.
In order to not contend with the idea, it's very common.
What is the idea? Really think about that. What is the idea? Okay,
So here's this framework of this idea. Indigenous cultures were destroyed, and that's the reason why there are so few of them. So that's why their cultural and social kind of constructs did not gain as much popularity and mass appeal within within the culture as we see it now. The total number is because at least one factor is going to be that they were slaughtered wholesale in a genocide. Now, the new idea he's bringing up is, well, why were they able to do that? And, okay, well, they were technologically advanced. How is, again, I'm going to repeat myself here, how does that have anything to do with the major thrust of the initial topic, which is, again, another side issue to where he wants to bring up, well, the reason why is percentages, and there's so few of them, so why should we care? Or obviously, you know, these things don't have any objective truth to them because only a few hundred people believe them. And then she's countering, well, the only reason there's a few hundred people is because we killed most of them. And then he's like, well, why were we able to kill them? What does that have to, this is a development. This is a really weird branch where now we're just going to talk about what technological superiority, but why? Why does the technological superiority, again, unless you're making, like I've said before, a weird connection between the reason we are technologically superior is because we have a culture that implies this, but again, that implies what he doesn't want to imply. He doesn't want to go down that route. Neither does Warren Smith. But they are going down that route. They just kind of had this half-assed shitty comment, then they got caught. Like, oh yeah, that actually is a really shitty comment, so I'm just going to pretend I'm stupid and didn't like that. I think people would just read it and hear my words exactly as are, and there's absolutely zero implication. How utterly anti-intellectually and just dishonest. That's just dishonest.
I'm a bit stunned by what you're implying.
No, you're acting in a kind of passive-aggressive way, which indicates...
No, not really. That wasn't necessarily passive aggressive. I could see maybe some degree of incredulity and some kind of, well, why do you think that? Why do you think that is? That's just that, like, again, there's maybe, I wouldn't really call it passive aggressive. Maybe you could see it. But again, you talk about hypersensitivity here. She has the lightest of challenging tones to him when he's questioning her book and her expertise. So then she comes back with it in the lightest of manner, and he flips out, and he is utterly incensed, apparently, or irritated by this. How dare you be passive-aggressive to me? But then he makes a weird justification for genocide based upon cultural superiority. But I'm totally not implying that, but it kind of is there. And now he's, no, nah, I'm out. This I didn't watch this whole video. I just saw a little bit of this, and I'm like, I've seen some of his other stuff. And like, I was asked to kind of review his stuff and review specifically one of these 3 videos, with mention of the other one and this right here, because the person who's talking to me about this, kind of former student, wanted my opinion on this, because they're somebody who's like, they're kind of like, oh, Warren Smith is interesting, you know, this. They're young and they're very attracted to anti-orthodox, outsider, rebel kind of things, hence why they like me, because I'm kind of that same genre, but the rebel intellectual. But this is crap. This is crap. Again, he's going to get a lot of views, he's going to get a lot of subscribers, because there's a huge market for people who love dunking on left-leaning stuff, and it's not a particularly good market.
So you're not happy
I genuinely am being 100% authentic. My visceral reaction to a white man sitting and saying to me, and why were we able to commit genocide on them? And then just pausing.
Yes.
Is very visceral to me.
Well, let's go back. First of all, it's interesting that you brought up my skin color, because I thought that was the exact opposite of the point you're trying to make in the book.
again, hypersensitive. Should she have brought up his skin color? Probably not. Mainly because it just gives him more fuel to feel victimized on this one. But again, the whole thing she's bringing up is, again, she was talking about Western culture, which is very associated with whiteness. It is associated strongly with whiteness to a certain degree, because those were the dominant racial characteristics. That is some degree of whiteness. And she's talking about a white culture, Western culture, coming in and killing a bunch of that's what he's talking about. So then she's saying, okay, so now a guy, a white or white passing individual is from Western culture is now saying, well, why were we able to do that? Didn't he even say we? Pretty sure he did. So he included himself in there. And now she's like, again, I don't agree with her on this. She shouldn't have brought up his race. That's not a great thing. And now he's going to run with this and act all victimized based on this because, oh, you're being prejudiced against me because I'm white and male. It's just like, well, it's possible she's that way. But also, the genocide was perpetrated by a white male-dominated culture. And now you're trying to say, hey, why were we able to do that? It must be because we were superior, but you don't want to say that, but you are implying that, but you don't want to imply that. Either you're really terrible at discussing things, or you're so focused on just asking questions that you're asking really stupid shit.
But anyway, let's come back to the argument.
You haven't read my book, so you wouldn't know what the point is.
You said that the point.
So he hasn't read the book. Okay, that answered that question. So this is all just jackass material. Oh no. Oh no. Oh God. It just keeps getting worse.
Point of your book is it's all about you can't say this as this person and whatever. But anyway, it doesn't.
What the fuck was that? The whole point of your book is that you can't say this about that. What the hell was that? You don't know what the point of the book is. You don't know anything, apparently. Like, she barely mentioned what the point of her book was. She kind of mentioned it, but mostly it was about, like, again, social, like, she kind of mentioned it, but maybe she mentioned it other word, but, like, she mostly was focusing, okay, everyone seems to be really focusing on this one chapter, transgender one, which now we're not talking about.
Matter.
You're very reductive. I thought you were a lot more intellectual than this.
And yeah, okay, that is, yeah, she's going to be, I'm sorry. At this point, he is incredibly reductive. Yeah, she's being snarky as shit. Not necessarily a great look, but I'm sorry. The amount of snark that I have seen from right-leaning or center-right or heterodox intellectuals, including Warren Smith, about everything. The amount of snark. The amount of overall kind of smug, nasty, weird comments, even when they're having fun, but it's only fun for them. They're always making fun of others, never having themselves made fun of. So they get a slight bit of pushback, a little bit of attitude, and they're going to have a goddamn conniption. They're just going to, they just crumble into absurdity, and they crumble into dust, and this is just very, very irritating to engage with.
This is revealing.
It's revealing. What, that she is somewhat disdainful of him after he has proven through his actions and words and his intellectual rigor that he's not really engaging in good faith, and he's not engaging really with the topic to any depth, and he is very reductive. He's not playing the game. And you might say, oh, I don't want to play a game. I don't like this. But, like, look, a discussion is a game. Language is many ways a game. Various different types. You can have a more aggressive game like debate. You can have a more passive, fun give and take thing like a discussion. This is an interview discussion. So there's certain game aspects. It can be a little aggressive. It can not be aggressive. But you still play the game. He has so far been just almost to a ridiculous nature, an almost parody, like anti-playing the game. Like, if you've ever seen any of those people where, like, they simply cannot work with, like, somebody's trying to do a comedy routine, or somebody's trying to like have fun and make jokes and they're taking everything literally like a robot, if you've ever encountered that, that's what Konstantin Kisin is doing. And then being mockingly after the fact. Like they're not actually playing the game, and really
articulates that.
I think this is very revealing, but let's come back to the argument. The argument you were making was that the Aboriginal society and other indigenous societies, as you call them, were more human because whatever reason, and they were there.
What? Again, like you haven't really tried to understand. Like, I don't like this for whatever reason. Try to stake out what you think their position is as clearly as possible so that they can respond to it rather than making these for whatever reason, which undermines the argument. Again, I might have done this once or twice in this discussion, but I usually try to explain out what's going on as best as possible. And if I start failing at this, then okay, I might get frustrated. But again, and you could certainly say he's frustrated at this point. Maybe he has reason. But again, for whatever reason, more human. And again, I haven't seen enough discussion here to any degree. And again, there might be more. It's a much longer interview, but it's quite clear, at least Warren's selections here. Definitely want to critique Warren as much as Kisin here, though again, this is a Warren, like, I'm sorry, why am I, now I'm going to have to talk to the person. They wanted me to review and talk about Warren Smith. He barely talks in this goddamn thing. He just makes these occasional asides where he jumps in and throws some half-assed comment that doesn't even make any sense. I'm gonna have to talk, like, maybe he needs to send me one where Warren Smith actually says more than 100 words in a 10-minute video.
For models for emulation.
I don't think I said more human. I said there is something fundamentally human.
You said more human.
If you really look at what I'm saying, is that there are other frameworks that are perhaps more human, that are more,
what
that
makes
are
them
less
more human. Your idea that everything since the Aboriginals is an artificial environment. Well, those societies were artificial in their own way too.
Yeah, I'm not saying anything as rigid as what you're imposing onto me.
As though this is the Western framework.
Okay, so again, the editing there is a nice little gotcha, and again, should probably catch that. She did say more human. Again, this seems to be a bad faith investigation on this, to where I'm not sure if she was saying it is 100% morally better, but she might have meant the phrase more human as in more naturalistic, in the sense that there hadn't been so much control established that naturally occurring minority expressions hadn't been curtailed. Meaning that in an environment, one way you could take this, I'm not sure if I necessarily agree, and I think this is perhaps a bit idealistic and overly sentimental on her part towards the Aboriginal. Let's just assume we have an environment that is extremely hospitable, so very nice, very hospitable to many forms of diverse life. You're going to probably see in there a lot of diversity, a lot of differences of life, whether it's bugs or mammal, anything else. You're going to see all of them. And you're also going to see large and small groups. You're going to see tons of one type of animal, but you also find small amounts of other animals, and those populations will rise and fall a little bit, but they'll stay stable. There's no extinction event, because it is an environment that is plentiful enough with limiting destructive predators or super predators that might cause extreme changes to the environment because they predate so much. In such an environment, you're going to have tons of these things. Compare that to an area to where there is extreme harshness. It's very hostile, which means that the only things that will survive there are things that can fit. survival of the fittest, that environment. And maybe that environment fits certain things. Maybe there's predators that do exist in there that can hunt these animals, and then there's other prey animals that can feed them, blah, 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 blah. Something like that. So it would seem to me that at least part of her argument may be suggesting that prior to, as maybe the geographic, social, and historical things of Western societies meant that because there is a lot of diversity, maybe this is the irony, is that there is so much diversity and so much strength in there, and there was a strong warlike culture that developed for competition, that these things developed very, very strong defensive and offensive capabilities, and then there was a homogenation. So France homogenized Frenchness and controlled the concept of Frenchness to enable it to survive against the competition with the English, German, or the Spanish, or the Portuguese, or anything else, the Italians. Okay. But it may be in Aboriginal ones because it was more loosey-goosey. Maybe things lived and died. Maybe smaller things were allowed to exist or exist for a long time because there wasn't this need to form or create a cohesive identity for whatever reasons. Maybe this is true, maybe this is false. This is the idea she's presenting. When I mean true or false, I mean like historically true or false. But the idea that, at least when it comes to gender expression, that's what she's talking about, or certain social and cultural expression. So, this part right here, at least the ones that we're dealing with right here, theory, this isn't necessarily insane to think of, is that these things that were not unnatural, not terrible, not harmful, not destructive, merely different, that could exist within a society that didn't have the necessity of extreme control that certain Western societies did develop and did have a strong emphasis on to a certain degree. When those Western societies came in, dominated and killed and controlled due to technological advancement, that the society, that we lost these things. And now we just assume that, well, through a might makes right kind of thing, or because they survived, we assume that anything that looks like or that could be seen as divergent from the dominant culture must be imperfect and must be inefficient, must be not as good. That's not a crazy theory. Not an insane theory. Not sure I 100% agree with it. I could see potential flaws in there, but I've not seen flaws developed here, either with Kisin's questions or with Warren Smith's commentary, whatever we may say of this commentary.
As rigid as what you're imposing onto me.
As though this is the Western framework being rigidly imposed by Konstantin upon her.
I'm
What? Again, this mockery, you said Western things were being imposed on them, and so now you're saying he's imposing on, but you just have this obsession with being imposed upon and frameworks. That's just dishonest. Again,
talking through things and around things.
You certainly are talking.
At least she's talking, Warren. Because so far you have said zero insightful commentary, zero insightful anything, or anything specific at all. This is bad commentary. This is bad reaction commentary.
Upon her.
I'm talking through things and around things.
You certainly are talking around and through things, I guess.
In a way.
I'm sorry, I just don't see that there's enough mockery here or there's enough to mock here to warrant this reaction on Warren's part.
Though what you're doing is you're going, you've said this thing, and this thing isn't everything. And so I would love it if we could genuinely talk.
I'm trying.
And you could.
I'm trying to address your argument, right? I gave you 4 arguments in response to the things that you said.
And we've only really got to one.
Well, yes, because you got upset at me saying something about the
But
Aboriginals
what
and us
were you
being...
meaning?
Once again, she still has
I'm not sure. Maybe he cut out the 4 arguments, but that's a shit. I'm sorry. The reason we didn't move on from it is because it was a really terrible argument. And yes, like, what do you mean by this argument? Well, I don't mean anything. Well, I just mean exactly what it says. Then it has nothing to do with what we're talking about. Not really. Explain it more. What exactly about this do you mean for your argument? Again, just...
not let this go. And this is where it goes off the rails.
If a civilization is able to produce things like penicillin and the ability for its children not to die in childbirth, I think that indicates that that civilization has something positive about it.
Okay, so Aboriginals didn't need penicillin because they didn't have any of the diseases.
As though there was no such thing as infections in Australia prior.
Okay. So again, he says that he doesn't want to say that this is a moral thing. Initially, Kisin, remember, says that he wasn't making a moral argument, idea about superiority and technology, whatever. But then, in further explanation, he's making, well, a society that is able to do these things with technological advancement must be, that is positive and good. So the opposite of that is what? A society that does not develop these things. What are you saying? Notice how, again, when you actually get them to explain it, it is exactly what you accuse them of, but then they get upset and uppity and pissed off that you do that. And again, I'm not sure I 100% disagree with the idea that, again, a culture that develops or a society that develops it. But again, this is not... For literally hundreds of years. And the great irony is that, again, whatever British culture, like if we were to look at British culture, English culture, prior to Roman and conquest and stuff like that, you're looking at the Gaelic kind of stuff, you're looking at the Celts and whatnot. I don't think they had a lot of penicillin or a lot of advancements of math and technology. They didn't have shit and they got conquered. So, okay, so British culture at that time got conquered and was replaced by the better one. Was replaced by this and that. And we're just always, it's always advancing, replacing, and betterment. But it's like that is maybe an efficiency argument or something like that. But again, at least in the very specific part here, when it came to, again, the only reason, again, this is the framing of Warren Smith. Warren Smith wanted to talk mostly about this new theory in regards to, I guess, transgenderism, though it seems gone off the rail at this point a little bit. This doesn't suggest, again, just because you were advanced in one way or the other and you specialization in something does not necessarily mean that the other culture did not have things that are positive within their own culture. And again, frequently there is no, oh, well, we'll pick and choose the best of this. It's like, no, it's destroyed and thrown away. That's a big also thing. That's a kind of a development with kind of the colonialist kind of mindset, and especially the, kind of the 18th century colonial mindset, is that there wasn't this, we conquer you, let you live the way you live, you just pay us tribute. It's more, we conquer you, we impose a new culture, our culture on you to make you like us because ours is superior because we conquer you. And oftentimes that means that, again, I don't put a ton of stock into this, but certain indigenous practices and concepts or whatever are oftentimes erased and destroyed. Often to the detriment of the whole, because while, yes, survival of the fittest, you were the most fit for a specific thing, that you ended up hyper specializing to that environment. So now if the environment changes, you don't have those latent think about this in evolution standpoint, because you eliminated all of the things that had those latent genes that were minority genes. They weren't represented very strong, but they may be useful later on. Now you might be saying, well, what does use of transgenders have? Again, we're not talking about that yet. Though we could be. It may be more useful in a society right now to have looser gender roles. It could be. Or it could not be. The thing is that this rigid control prevents even from the idea of that existing. This hyperfixation prevents those minority genes from existing at all. Even in a minority, we're not even talking about we want to make this the dominant culture. Just it can exist without you actively trying to destroy it. That is the issue. Want to homogenize, but again, this idea is the homogeneity does not necessarily lead to strength. It might lead to strength in a short term as long as the environment doesn't change. And again, if you don't want the environment to change, you have to exercise increasingly greater and greater control over that environment. And if there are things outside of your control in that environment, then eventually that hyper specialization and homogenization will lead to a mass extinction. Again, this is all very weird to talk about when we're talking about culture, whatever. But again, they want to take this into a weird, rather than looking at sociological and psychological and cultural things, they want to take it in this weird objective reality kind of thing. So we have to do this, and it kind of gets a little bit awkward. But it's still, even then, if they have a better argument, it's sure as shit not coming through, and certainly not with Warren Smith here.
Diseases.
As though there was no such thing as infections in Australia.
And again, this idea of like, oh, they did develop things. They might have, again, they didn't develop penicillin, but they could have had, herbs and bush kind of medicine that they used, different techniques. And okay, so penicillin, we didn't get penicillin. But again, something that we've also talked about that was not developed is the idea of burns for new growth. That was not really unless again, that wasn't a dominant idea when I talk about burns of new growth for like forest maintenance and even like farmland maintenance. Is within Western society for a long time, this was not really a practice that was done. Controlled burns. There's some examples here and there, I'm sure you could find them, but the dominant thing, this is not really big in the 1700s, 1600s, 1700s, 1800s. There's some here and there, but honestly, especially by the time you get to 1800s in America, oftentimes a big, huge problem we would have later on in the 19th century, 20th century, and so on, is we weren't doing controlled burns in certain areas. And because we wouldn't do that, when we did get a fire, it would be extraordinarily impossible to control and burn way too much. Controlled burns help reduce those instances. They also help with certain farm practices and whatnot. The other thing we might talk about is, okay, like just there's certain practices by the Native Americans when it comes to farming and other stuff. Again, they weren't massive agricultural farmers, but they were farmers. These things were very useful for us to take and adopt in certain ways to the way we'd like to do things, so we get the best of both worlds. There are many examples of this, of minority cultures providing a very positive to a majority culture that is, currently colonizing the shit out of them, dominating them, which would imply that, again, just because this culture did not develop exactly as yours, develop in exactly the same way, and have all of the technological advancements, exact same order or the same time frame as you, not mean that they didn't develop other things. And again, the complete utter, maybe it's not massive. Maybe overall it's still 75 25, 80, 20 split, the sense that, you guys are mostly right. The fact that you are so unbelievably unwilling and mocking of this possibility shows anti-intellectual, pseudo-intellectual proclivities.
Prior to the West's arrival.
I
Right.
really thought you were going to be open to me.
I'm
and you
extremely
are.
open
I
to
don't
you,
think
but you have to
are.
make a rational argument that persuades me.
Okay, so I made lots of really interesting new arguments you'd never heard
I
before.
have heard lots of those arguments
You
before.
haven't.
This is hilarious. It's like as though, no, you've never heard of my genius before.
You haven't heard. You haven't heard
How
about
would you
the
know which arguments I've heard?
because I live in this world, and the adoption argument is I'm the first one making it.
As though her argument around the social perceptions of adopting an orphan is somehow revolutionary.
I am.
They are new, you son of a bitch. If I haven't heard of it. When it comes to the concepts of social constructivism and even in relating to the gender, I haven't heard this argument applied to this. Again, it's new and crazy and insane new theory, but it's also not, and I've heard it before, but it is and it's not. This is just bad faith.
That says nothing about biology.
Because it's not an argument about biology. This is like getting upset with me when I start talking about themes of like guilt and obligation and themes of madness in Hamlet. And you go, well, what about biology? Well, I'm not what do you mean? What do you want me to talk about? Like the biological, like chemistry of this? Like, it's not really my specialty. So like I could try, but I'm gonna be honest. Like, if you want me to always deal with all things of all things of all matters of all the time, I'm not going to be able to. I'm sorry, I can't always have the 100%. I can't study the mathematical, the biological, the chemistry, the sociological, the historical, the fictional, the psychological, I can't study every possible thing when I want to talk about when I also like, okay, now that I have gone through everything, I am now going to write a paper about guilt in Hamlet, and it's going to be 4,000 pages long. Because that's how much time I have to cover every single fucking thing. And you might be saying, well, why am I being so hyperbolic about this? Because, again, this is not being an honest, again, dishonest. This is a dishonest engagement with this. This is frustrating. Oh, that's so frustrating. Like, I'm sorry that you are obsessed with biological essentialism when it comes to psychology and sociology. I'm sorry, or you know what? I'm glad. Good for you. That's a fun way to study things. Go for it. It's like what is the field of evolutionary psychology. That looks at kind of like how psychology comes about from like a biological evolutionary traits and whatnot. That's one perspective. It's not the whole picture. It's not. Even when you're looking at things from a biological standpoint, that's not the whole picture, because it can't explain all things. And not in a way that makes sense to anybody else, because not everybody is purely biological. Well, I mean, you can make the argument for that, but it's fine. Make that argument. But if somebody wants to argue it elsewhere, you can disagree. You can disagree quite strongly, but it seems to me the height of arrogance, height of presumptive arrogance, that you have stumbled upon the absolute perfect truth and the only way to study and examine an object or an idea and concept. Absolute sheer fucking hubris. God, it took me 2 hours. It took me over 3 hours to get through a 10-minute video because it's such bullshit.
I'm saying it's not the only framework. The only framework isn't women, men. It's not the only framework. So I'm demonstrating to you through my research that there are other frameworks that you may be interested in examining in case there's something interesting
I'm aware.
there.
Yes,
The map is not objective truth itself. It's our pursuit to understand objective truth. So yes, that map can improve. We can find new ways to get to the objective truth. The problem is you're not making any observations about what is objectively true. You're simply critiquing the framework.
It's just honestly, I just don't think it's either willful ignorance or just plain fucking ignorance that he just doesn't seem to understand. One of the key features, again, with philosophy and psychology, the development of, like, during like the fucking Enlightenment, I think, or going back even further, is the understanding is that, again, you go back here, this guy right here. There's an action of perception here that we are doing. This act is dependent upon our minds, the individual mind as it develops. And unless you're arguing that we are perfect people with perfect perception of the reflection of reality, and that the reflection of reality is perfect, then we need to think about how we perceive. Epistemology. How do we know, and how do we know what we know, and what counts as knowledge in the analysis of this? And one of the things we do is we know that it is very much influenced, our framework is influenced by many things. Our language, structure, our culture, cultural history, our even biology. We'll say that too, just for you, because you are really obsessed with it. Our biology and our brain structures, the structure of the human brain, and how we perceive things, the structure of our eyes, the structure of our ears, our biological essential nature, and along with our psychological, our conscious experience, the thing that is really hard to figure out, this weird amalgamation of various sensory details that creates what seems to be, I don't know if you'd go with a mind-body separation. They're both, I'm not really big on that, but creation of a conscious experience, consciousness, an awareness of things, of an objective reality. But again, I am constantly, and again, we can even go into the study of biology and how we determine and understand the world. A lot of it is through sight. Our sight is one of our primary things. So how we see. So again, see things, see an object, or more importantly, what we see is the light bouncing off of that object, and then we can eventually maybe touch that object. So all that's great and wonderful, but we know that whether it's biological or sociological, whether it's through experiences, whether it's through our memory, of the biologic process of remembering things in a conscious manner, all of these things can affect our perception, our understanding, our anticipation, our guesswork, because we're an engine. Our brain is an engine for assumptions and guessing things, because we got to figure stuff out. And we got to make a guess, because we can't know always whether that person with long hair is a woman or a man, but we can make an assumption based upon previous experiences and a collection of data. We can make an assumption, we can make a guess, a probability of that person you're about to walk up to is a woman based upon long hair and other factors. Great. But all of that is really, really, really inconsistent across human space. There are some kind of consistency, thirdly, but there's a shitload of inconsistencies and small changes that maybe you might think aren't significant, but they are incredibly significant, oftentimes because we act upon it. Our perception is guided by our frame. The frame should also be analyzed because it is informing and inferring upon our perception. I'm sorry, I'm just looking at one of the suggestions here. Apparently he likes Charlie Kirk, and I'm sorry. Anybody who likes Charlie Kirk or think Charlie Kirk has ever said anything intellectual or of any intellectual worth in his entire goddamn existence probably is a ass. I'm sorry, you probably are a hack ass. Absolutely. Charlie Kirk is one of the dumbest people I've ever goddamn had the unfortunate experience of seeing and of watching from a distance. But again, the very fact that this professor has, from your perspective, such an insane, crazy, strange idea and theory, such a odd way of doing this, because it must be because she's prejudiced. It must be because of all these things, because she hates white Anglo-Saxon culture and white Western culture. That very idea, the fact that you know that, is proof positive of the veracity, or at least the importance of what she is doing, because she is clearly operating on an ideological framework that is making her wrong in your perspective. Let's just assume she is objectively wrong. So that would mean that when she says, hey, our frameworks make us susceptible to bias and otherwise ideologically compromised positions, blah, 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 should not that then cause a bit of self-reflection to where, okay, that sounds like a perfectly good idea. You're a perfect example of this because I believe you are objectively wrong, but you are a human being like me and you've come to a completely wrong conclusion. Let's just say objectively, because of your framing, because of your ideology, because of the way you have twisted the way you see things and the way your mind is currently constructed. So your very existence is proof that, at least on the basis of your idea of this, that you are saying, hey, the way we look at things, we want to be careful of, because we might have biases. We might want to be careful of these things, that we could be operating on false positives and all this stuff. That should cause you to go, yes, I agree 100%. Now, your conclusion, your answer is wrong. Your method, I agree with. Your conclusion is batshit crazy, but your method is fine. The problem is that you then have to turn this on yourself and then go, okay, I want to make sure, how do I analyze this? How do I figure this out? Because there is a good possibility that I am equally wrong. Or even if I'm not equally wrong, maybe they're wrong 99%. But maybe you're wrong by 57%, 47%. 27%. Either way, those are significant wrong percentages. So that must mean there is the possibility that maybe the 1% that person is right about, even though you think they're almost wholly wrong, you are 100%, they're all wrong. Maybe objectively they are right 1%, and that 1% doesn't overlap with the percentage that you are correct on. So maybe you actually do need to take what they say and take it as truth, because you're only at 67% correct. If you take their 1% correct that they are and add it to yours and include it into yours in some kind of analysis, maybe you will end up with actually 68% or more, depending on what you're taking in, whether it's a method or an answer, I don't know. But this is utter pseudo-intellectual bullshit. This is anti-intellectual and pseudo-intellectual. Honestly, I would really, again, you could make I wouldn't want to do this because it's going to take too much time, but put together all of the stuff that Warren Smith says. Does he say anything of substance? In his critique, does he explain things out? Does he try to give specific statements of fact and figures and try to rationalize through logical statements and premises and then conclusions based upon those premises? Does he do anything like that? No. What he does is he makes these half-ass pseudo-intellectual self-help guru statements at best. When he says, oh, she's talking about, we're talking about the biological reality, and she's trying to talk about style and social stuff. Well, what does that mean? What's the problem with that? What's the difference between those things? How do they interact with each other, and how do they not interact with each other? Do you have anything to say about that, Warren? No? Hack. All right. I got 2 more from him, and that took me 2 hours plus to get through his bullshit and Kisin's bullshit. So we had one from here from Professor Dave. Now, I've seen a couple of his videos way back when. And he tends to be somewhat of more of an aggressive a dickhead with his analysis, kind of like me. So I can disagree with his approach to a certain degree, and I do sometimes. Like, it's fun dunking on people who are assholes and being assholes back, but sometimes it can come off as overly aggressive, overly critical, lacking of charitability. Though I understand, because again, like Warren Smith, it would seem, and others, again, I hadn't seen much of Warren Smith, but I knew vaguely of him, and again, when he suggested by the student, hey, could you watch him, give me on him? I'm afraid I'm going to have to give the opinion of I think he's a jackass and a pseudo-intellectual, anti-intellectual wanker. But again, it's fun dunking and aggressively being on them, and again, Professor Dave tends to be more aggressive towards those who are themselves kind of arrogantly, presumptuously dickish. But this is... Then we have Jordan Peterson here. Good God, he wanted Jordan. Nonsensical. All of them talk like self-help gurus, and again, the big thing with self-help gurus is they don't actually say much. They say weird hallmark platitudes where actually they try to make it sound objective, but really it's actually the opposite. It's very strange. Conservatives, MAGAs, and the intellectual dark web, the rebel academics, they've actually all become perfect poster child for like the postmodern subject that a lot of postmodernists talked about where we were going, and a lot of times they were saying, oh, the postmodernists, nothing, there's nothing true in this world, there's no objective reality, everything's subjective, there is no existence, it's all just subjective social constructives, blah 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 blah. They make this argument like all of the postmodernists that they identify, like Foucault, Derrida, and I think they include Saussure in there, along with a bunch of other, even sometimes Nietzsche, which he's kind of weirdly like, he's like pre-modernism, and like some people have argued that he's like a proto modernist, postmodernist kind of thing. Anyway, what they often argue or seem to assume is that a lot of these postmodernists believe that the postmodern idea of nothing means, there's no meaning, everything's subjective, is necessarily a good thing. It's not. And in fact, more than a few have talked about in their works, if they actually read them, that oftentimes this, much like Nietzsche and the nihilist, that this actually can lead to, if we aren't careful, the belief in nothing that has any meaning, blah blah blah, can actually lead a complete loss of meaning, connection, and ability to do anything. You basically just becomes this weird zombie-like entity. Using my word, this almost destructive, corrosive, non-functional entity. So the idea of this is the critique is not necessarily to completely destroy all subjectivity or the subject, and or dissolve all frames, dissolve all large cultural structures and social constructs. It's more to acknowledge that they are social constructs, and if they are, is there ways in which we can construct them in ways that are more equitable or favorable or beneficial to things, to acknowledge that these are not naturally occurring objective realities, but subjective ones. You may disagree with that to a certain extent, but again, it's not wholly, there is no meaning, nothing is, nothing has exists, it's all subjective. That's oftentimes what a lot of the postmodernists, they weren't actually talking about then. They were more like, this is actually weirder. What I have found is that despite their insistence on the objective reality, most of these new intellectual dark web kind of people, the radical things, these guys, they actually end up being, the way they argue and the way they talk, even if it's not their belief structure, but the way they engage with it, they engage with it in the most stupidly like mindlessly abstract manner. They're almost anti-meaning. They refuse to acknowledge that there is meaning behind their words, behind the objective meaning that they believe to be 100% true, but they also aren't explaining themselves well. Peter Jorson, again, they speak like those meaningless statements to where, like, oh, you know, the, like, whatever he said here, Warren Smith made a couple of comments about, like, again, she's conflating style with objective biological reality. But, like, okay, what do you mean? How is that confliction? How is that conflicting? Like, maybe it makes it obvious to me, but explain. They don't. They make these statements that can be interpreted a dozen different ways, that have very little actual meaning. Or again, when he made his statement, then he tries to pretend like the statement has no implications of any kind, Konstantin Kisin, that it's just what I said it was. But then he reveals later on that he isn't. So again, it's this, I don't know, there's aspects to it where they are so wishy-washy, so Mott and Bailey, so two-faced, three-faced, so utterly dishonest with themselves, with their engagement with the topic, and with their conversation, that half the time I'm not even sure if they know what they're saying and meaning, because they don't engage with it well. It's this weird, I sometimes almost, the way they engage with it, despite their errors, they almost feel like this weird nihilistic postmodern kind of monster, more so than any of the purple-haired, college people that they make fun of. These guys have absolutely no meaning, no good faith, no engagement, nothing other than this weird performative, purely subjective social image that they craft and mold and change, and it has no foundation, no objectivity, which is why 1 second they can say, I'm pro tariffs and I love this, and then because something changes, the wind changes, they literally say, oh, I hate tariffs, they're awful, and no one ever likes this, I've never liked them. And then you try to present reality, you're like, well, no, that's completely different, that wasn't me, what are you talking about? Or, no, well, that's completely, the way you're interpreting this is wrong, and I don't know why you're doing it. Like, they're constantly gaslighting the world into believing whatever is current with them, and that nothing matters unless they say it matters. Everything is subjective until it's not. And it's always to their benefit. That's another thing you can do with pseudo-intellectuals, is, again, if they are never taking an L, if they're never even opening up the possibility of taking a loss, if they are constantly always winning, they are never giving ground, if they are never, ever, ever seceding any power, there is no possibility for the other speaker to actually change their mind and to do this. And I'm not just saying, like, oh, well, I could change my mind if presented with facts. Like, okay, but if they never have done that, they've never indicated even the slightest bit of, like, this, you know what, that's an interest. That makes me think, I'm not 100% sure on what you just said is true, but it does make me kind of maybe wonder about what I just said. So, you know what, I'm not going to retract it, but I'm going to give you that one. I need to investigate that a little bit more. Maybe my theory and my perspective actually does have an answer to that, but it's clear that this is an area, this is a blind spot that it hasn't quite attached to. That if you've ever seen a conservative or intellectual dark web kind of new age anti-woke person ever say that when confronted with anything woke or progressive, send me that fucking video, please. I want to save it, frame it. I want to print out every single frame of that video, no matter how long, physically on a nice little nice little 8x11 sheet of paper, nice photo paper. And then I'm going to frame each of those frames. I'm going to cover my whole goddamn house in it. I'm going to wallpaper it like a fucking collage. Like one of those things where it's like it's every single shot from the film or every single like frame from the film arranged to show a picture of somebody or something like that. You know, you've seen like the art projects like that and put together. I'll do something like that. Yeah, go set, please. I probably won't because that'd be exorbitantly expensive, but I haven't, and I've spent a lot of time looking at stuff like Jordan Peterson and others. Again, this guy Warren Smith. I've seen a little bit of his stuff. Like I saw like a video or something mentioned from him, maybe an article or something. I can't remember. Was the name and face look familiar, so it might have been a video sometime, like a year or 2 years ago or something like that. A while ago. I don't know when. And I didn't watch all of it. I just had some vague idea that again he was an academic, and I think he got fired. Which hey, joined club. We both got forced out by bad administrative actions. I chose to walk out on my own, somewhat on my own steam, because of my disagreement. But that's the other thing is oftentimes they're also very emotionally compromised. We'll say they got an axe to fucking grind. And sure, a lot of woke academics, you might say, have an axe to grind. Sure. But do they have an axe to grind? Have they developed one over the years? Have you noticed that these people have an edge and an axe to grind? And if they do, like, look, that's bad. Bad. I know I got an axe to grind, and I got a certain blind spot when it comes to certain conservative talking points. That's why I try hard as I can. I'm fully willing for somebody to show me and to kind of call me out on some of this stuff. I try to be aware of how my biases are. But that was one video. Maybe next time, I kind of wanted to play some videos, but that took way longer. I might try to shorten this up, but I felt like I needed to explain the stuff that is not being explained in videos. That Warren Smith isn't taking the time to do. That Konstantin Kisin, at least, isn't seemingly doing well. That she's trying to a certain degree, maybe she's not doing too well, but trying to explain the background to how this all works. Because, again, in the interview, live, she doesn't have necessarily time to do this because it's a limited interview. He doesn't either, so I don't blame them. Warren Smith, you have plenty of time to do this, and you didn't. This is my problem. Okay. We're going to go ahead and wrap it up there. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for hanging out. Be sure to like and subscribe and follow and all that good nonsense. I do appreciate it. Again, it was originally streamed on Twitch, where you can find me at twitch.tv, the empty, where I do lots of stuff like this. I also do gameplay stuff when I can, try to play the game, but I'm going to try to do a bit more analysis because I'm a little tired of there being a lack of in-depth stuff. I feel like there's a lack of in-depth live, even the reaction stuff that I've seen tends to be, again, reactive without really a strong critical analysis. So hopefully I provided that to some utility. Again, if you disagree with me, you're probably wrong. But let me know. I'm joking about that last bit. Just honest to God joking. But again, this was one video. Maybe tomorrow we will do other ones because I know like my student suggested, I think one of these, I think it was this one, but I saw this one. Well, I'll watch this one. I hadn't seen this one, or maybe it's this. I don't remember which one. They asked me to watch now. They also wanted me to watch some of the Dawkins debate, which I don't. That one's going to take another 4 hours. We're just going to stop it right here. So again, we're going to go ahead and end the stream here. Thank you for being here. Thank you for hanging out. And until next time, and as always, I hope you have a good one.